This occurred while backpacking in the Appalachian Trail in northern PA, while me and a friend had just finished hiking up a very large hill and were ready for lunch. We had planned on eating at a shelter that was another 2 miles down and up another hill. After some discussion, we decided to eat at a shelter as there would be water here. Now, after we arrive at the shelter, we come across another hiker. No, this guy was just carrying an old backpack and was digging for crumbs out the bottom of a Fritzo's bag. So, he just seems out of it. We said to him was he backpacking or day hiking, never making eye contact, but he mutters out backpacking. We then ask him if he was section hiking or through hiking, as in doing the entire trail. He looks at us with this weird look and says, I just go hiking through. After a little bit of talking and avoiding our questions, he says, I'm gonna go. And he packs all of his things in his bag. We ask him his name, but he clearly had no idea what we're talking about, which we really find odd. He also doesn't explain what trail that he's on. After sort of explaining what he meant, he said, oh right, hatchet, which was obviously a load of rubbish because the guy was holding a pickaxe in his hand when he said this. We continued hiking and we reach our camping spot. We get settled for the night when I'm woken by Hatchet rustling through my backpack. Now me and my friend both use hammocks, and I had my backpack wrapped around the tree my hammock is on, so he ended up shaking the entire hammock. I scream hey, and he looks in the hammock, stares at me for a second, then bolts. By the time I get out of the hammock, he's nowhere to be seen. Turns out he stole a pack of tuna from my bag and some granola bars. The weird part was that when we get back into town, it turned out that old Hatchet was on the run. There was wanted posters for him up on all the doors. It turns out 2 weeks prior he had mugged a couple of people, leaving one guy pretty bloody. The whole thing was pretty weird, and we ended up giving our statement to the police, but we don't know whether they caught him or not. Now I was out in a nearby lake for the first day of summer with a pretty large group of friends. We got the alcohol, nowhere to be for a couple of days, and we knew it was going to be a good time. That's when creepy stuff starts happening. When the park ranger would come around eventually, so a select group of us opted to stay sober until he came by so we could talk to him without being caught. Now this seems to be a good plan, so he comes by and me and a few of the others go chat to him. He leaves and does no harm. We open up a few bottles and start catching up, and another truck pulls up and a guy gets out. We don't recognize the guy. Me and a few of the other guys get up quickly to see what he wants. He told us that he was a park ranger and says, have we seen another guy going around pretending to be one? He then tells us that this man is pretty dangerous. What the hell? So we tell him what we knew about him, and he turns a blind eye to our beverages in return. About an hour later, the first truck pulls in with its high beams on and just sits there. Us being stupid teenagers told the girls go in the tents and we'll handle it. We grabbed different things, some got knives and some got blunt objects, and started towards his truck waiting for something to happen. Nothing. About 5 minutes later he peels out and speeds off. The night continues and we got more and more drunk, forgetting about the truck. We eventually go to swim for a bit. When we're done in the lake, we went back up to the camp drying off, and we find all of our clothes hanging neatly on nearby trees with boot prints around them. Now none of us wore boots, by the way. First off, I love to camp. I've already been doing it my whole life. I've never had a scary experience until this past summer, when my boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality camping time. We had always gone with several other people, but this is the first time it's only us two. When we get out, we go to the car and decide to prep our gear for the mile hike back to the camping spot when two sketchy looking dudes come out of the trailer head, eyes on us. They then continue on to their old school VW camper van. I have a weird feeling about it but shrugged it off really, proceeding to go back to the camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times and knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I had a handful of different camping spots that I realised we could go to, and proceeded to check it out and decide on the best one for us. I then noticed what appears to be somebody camping further up the hill, so I decided that it's probably best if we pick a spot a little further down where we're mostly out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I still heard him yelling with someone else near the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we get everything set up, so I figured that I should start looking for firewood. Suddenly, this guy appears out of nowhere asking us if we could help and offers to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laugh because we're in the woods surrounded by trees, thus we can pick this up for free. He said I wouldn't find much wood because they'd already cleared it out. For weeks. For weeks, I said to him. How long have you been here? And he said almost a month. Now the longest anyone can camp in a national forest is 2 weeks really. I already had the creeps about him and he claimed that he was there alone. I'm a little confused and I say, well, I heard you yelling with someone and that he had referred to more people when talking about the wood. He then stammered backwards and said, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there on the other side of the river. He then proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived and he was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, KY, and had been living in the woods, interestingly, in an area very close to where I currently work. Strangely coincidental, I knew exactly where he's talking about because I see homeless people and drug addicts coming in out of the woods daily. So basically, he's a homeless person who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided that he would just live there instead. He's been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for food and beer, but he said we're the first people he's seen in weeks. His story's all over the place, and I knew he was lying about much of it. He wasn't alone, even though he claims to be. He even took us to the camp where there was literally tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he liked camping up where he could see everything and everyone, then showed us to the campsite. He had a strange shot view. By the time I finished talking to him, it's dark, and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to be polite to get him on his way again, so I can have a minute to process this. That's when I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that sketchy homeless creep right up there. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. I said, let's quietly get our stuff together and get straight out of there, which we eventually did and left our new trap set up because they would make too much noise. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get out of there, he said, "How's it going down there?" and proceeds quickly to try and follow us. We ended up getting out of there quickly, but in my mind, we were either going to get robbed, killed, or something else. Because he was not alone, his stories didn't make sense, and clearly there was lots of other people around we didn't know about, living off the grid. I called the park rangers the next morning and told them about him, and luckily, all he got from us was the new tarps. Now I was camping in the woods, in the backwoods specifically, with the nearest sign of humanity being a National Guard depot about 5 miles away. It was the week before Labor Day, and the campground was completely empty. We were half asleep in our tent when we heard what sounded like a little girl laughing in the distance. It continued for literally an hour before vanishing. I barely slept that night. Sounding like a dentist drill. We ended up staying up in the morning and leaving and still not knowing what it was to this day. I was walking with my cousins about 14 years ago when we found what looked like an old burnt out house. So naturally being kids, at the time having no sense of self-preservation, we decided we're going to explore it, and it was just full of charred wood and crap. But then my cousin found the entrance to a cellar. We busted an old rusted lock off the door and looked inside. It was dark down there, and we didn't really have any reason to go poking around it. Plus, we were starting to get freaked out, so we kicked some dirt down into it and walked off. When we get about 15 yards away from the house, some friends and I went about 2 hours into the woods one week, found a clearing and set up camp. After fishing, eating and drinking, we all fall asleep. Probably around 3 a.m. while it was dark as hell outside, there's the sound of some branches snapping which wake up my friend and I. We jumped out of our tent and grabbed our machetes, watching everyone else wake up. Whatever it was then gave off the loudest noise, sounding like a dentist drill. We ended up staying up in the morning and leaving and still not knowing what it was to this day. I was walking with my cousins about 14 years ago when we found what looked like an old burnt out house. So naturally being kids, at the time having no sense of self-preservation, we decided we're going to explore it, and it was just full of charred wood and crap. But then my cousin found the entrance to a cellar. We busted an old rusted lock off the door and looked inside. It was dark down there, and we didn't really have any reason to go poking around it. Plus, we were starting to get freaked out, so we kicked some dirt down into it and walked off. When we get about 15 yards away from the house, one cousin says that he heard a noise, so we stop. And yeah, there was a noise like somebody coming up the rotten stairs of the house. We peel back through the trees and see a kind of fuzzy shape crawling out of it which we left open. It looks like a big old dog. And then it stood upright, and yeah, we got out of there. We all ran off in different directions like morons, each of us convinced that the cellar thing is chasing us. I ran right through some briars in a panic and tore my arms and legs up, which got me in trouble when I got home. We're all fine otherwise, but did avoid going back into the woods for a long time. The closest thing I can figure it was a large black bear, or maybe a baby one to be specific. Maybe it had another entrance that we didn't know about, but seeing this hairy dark thing come out of the cellar standing up was really like a horror film. And that's presuming it was actually a bear and nothing else. My cat used to bring things in for me, mostly dead but sometimes living. He brought me a small wild rabbit that wasn't really passed away, and I made a bandage for it. I kept it for about a week before it was going around normally. My dad eventually said it's probably good to go back out again. So I took it out to the creeks near my house and put it under a tree by some vines. I took maybe 5 steps before I heard it scream, and turned around to see something ripped it in half. Now, I never saw what ripped it in half. I'm not sure whether it is a fox, but I literally couldn't see any other things around, and that's what terrified me. I have no idea to this day what happened to it, or why it passed away so quickly. I never discovered exactly what it was, and it probably was something normal, but the not knowing part kills me, and I think it's very bizarre I couldn't see or hear anything before or after the event. For years, I've been an avid backpacker and I live in New Mexico, so I go to some really remote places, mostly alone. Now, 2 experiences which stuck out to me are the following. One for the sheer danger of the experience, and the other because, well, I can't really explain what happened, even to this day. Now, if you've ever been alone at night, more than a day's hike under pack from anything not desert or 10k feet mountain, it might be hard to get the right mindset to appreciate the scariness of it, but here it goes. It was 2 days, about 26 miles into the wilderness, which is mostly lightly used trails that extend across a huge mesa at the eastern base of James Mountains in central NM, crisscrossing canyons that cut across Mesa. It was July 4th weekend, and daytime temps were in high 90s and low 100s. Being summer, I didn't carry a tent, just a light bag and a pad. Now, the first night was brilliant, beautiful, and I passed out without incident. Near the end of my second day, I come across a fresh mauled deer killed in the dry canyon. I've seen mountain lion kills before. This appears to be one, until a fresh kill means a cat is probably close by. Since it's right near the trail, I took a quick peek and then move on, climbing out of the canyon, not thinking much of it. About an hour later, along the ring of the canyon, I found a nice semi-sheltered sandstone lump with a little alcove on one side. The canyon's cliff was off on one side about 15 feet away and had a clear view of everything from the south and west, with the canyon directly north of me, seeming like a perfect place for me to spend the night. As a crow flies, I was only about 100 yards or so from where I'd noticed the kill earlier in the evening, although this is pretty far from my mind at the time. So I laid out my pad and bag in the partial alcove, munched on some jerky and half a power bar, slipping the last of my water, and that's a different story, trying just to doze off staring at the sky. Now, it's very dark and scary, but I see a shooting star and whatnot, until suddenly, there's a blood-curdling howl erupting from the canyon. My brain immediately kicks into its full throttle. There it is again. Butt naked, but from Homer Simpson flip-flops. I'm avoiding cactuses in yucca and juniper scrubs in the dark like a ballet dancer, not falling off the cliff, frantically trying to assess my situation. My food was hung about 100 yards from me in a piddly little pinnon. That was the largest grime thing that I could find, so at least the only bait I had to worry about was myself. It's closer. I have figured out by this point that the howling was at least one mountain lion. What I had counted on not happening was that the sounds of a fairly angry lion was following me on the trail. The trail that I camped on about 20 feet from a 400 feet cliff made me in a very uncomfortable sandwich situation. It's July, and I've been in the wilderness for 2 days. I smell like Carl's Jr. dumpsters, in other words, greasy food. My little alcove was actually situated a bit higher than the rest of the terrain around me, so I could see anything but to the east, which is of course where the trail comes from, and where the racket is getting louder. In a moment of desperation, I now realize that I'm a fool trying to out-hike the cat. The minute it catches a fresh scent, it will stalk me. It's what they're made for. Running like a madman would make me dinner faster, so I decide that my only choice at this point is just to wait and see what happens. I have a few big rocks nearby that I've collected in my hiking poles should it come to that. Not much of a chance though, really. The howling keeps getting louder, but at the same frequency, so whatever had gotten into this cat wasn't changing. So I sat crouched like Gollum on the top of my little sandstone castle. I'm now waiting for whatever's gonna happen next. It took about half an hour and several more howls later before I noticed that the last two have become more and more faint, and then bam, I hear what sounds like a third one join in, and they're just to the east of me, where I can't see. I desperately fight the urge to pop my head up and have a look for them. I keep telling myself not to act like prey, so I can finally hear twigs and things snapping as they've definitely begun to move from that area of the trail through to a scrubby area more towards me. This is 2003, so no cell phone. I'm thinking to myself, 30 years old and alone, might be about to jump off a cliff to try and avoid being eaten to death. Either way, I was pretty sure nobody was going to find me for weeks. I'd left an itinerary with some of the forest services, but I deviated from the plan for a second because the canyons that I'm on might have water there, or they could be dry. I decided to head at least 10 miles west of where I was planning on being. Unfortunately, the only dry water was at the rock pool that was stagnant, so I didn't want to try filtering from it, from the fear that my filtering might not work and might make things worse. This is my escape plan if it comes to it, but it doesn't make sense. All this is racing in my head, and finally, I see what I can only describe as the mountain lion centipede, 3 of them, single file, 2 juveniles and a mummy. I think they're really pretty, but I've never been so scared, yet in awe. In the starlight they appear almost white. They broke formation around my rock cove and start sniffing away. I'm like 5 feet from mummy at this point and pretty convinced I'm gonna get mauled. I kept as still as I could, probably stopping my breath and waiting. The juvenile cats seem less interested in me than themselves. However, their mum is checking me out and has made eye contact at least twice until she turns and runs away to the west, and the little ones follow, and I'm there, confused and naked and disorientated, but not mauled to death. Now, I didn't sleep well. I waited all night. They didn't return. I got myself together before sunrise and headed off in search of water. I eventually found some around midday near a little canyon with some mossy rocks. I drank up and then snapped in the shade for a few hours before refilling my water bag and heading onwards. As far in as I was, I didn't have much choice but to spend another night out there, thankfully this time uneventful. I remembered returning to my truck the following day and getting all freaked out because I saw big paws around where I was parked. Now for the next story. This is in Rio Grande, George, up near Taos, NM, October 94. I was camping solo in the gorge, just north of where the Rio Hondas meets the Rio Grande. There's zero human activity at night, but during the day, Man-by Hot Springs draws a little traffic. The bridge nearby gets some local trout fishing action. I had spent my day wandering around on the west rim of the gorge and had returned to my campsite, which was situated basically within arm's reach of Rio Grande. Now I fired up my whisper light and boiled a little river water for ramen. I then ate for a while and enjoyed the last bits of sunlight as it goes over the rim of the gorge and kick back and try and sleep. Just as I'm about to nod off, I had the feeling I'm not alone, and I figured I'm just paranoid and continued my happy journey to Dreamsland. Being October in northern New Mexico, it was fairly chilly after the sun goes down, so I was bundled up in the down bag and had a hoodie on. I think I remembered feeling a wet nose against my cheek at first, before I felt claws on my thighs. 2 badgers had crawled onto my lap and were checking me out. Now badgers are pretty cool and cute from a distance, but up close at night they're pretty terrifying. I screamed and jumped up, and they looked back at me. Now this isn't my main story, but it sets some of the stage. Now they won't leave, so eventually I got silly and started planning water out of the river and throwing it at them. This made me cold, and I think it amuses them more than it scared them away. Still, they don't get any closer after that, so I decided I don't care. I still had a bit of fright, and my imagination was going crazy, so sleep was not an option. I sat there and popped off in my sack, giving the evil a couple of times to them, trying to make them go off. Now, against a warm rock, waiting there to fall asleep, or just wait for the morning to come. Now it's still relatively early in the evening, so if I stayed up all night, it was going to be a long one. I was going over this and other things, just in my head, and I noticed a faintly blue glow coming from somewhere far up in the gorge. Now, the blue glow is much lighter over a shorter span of time, and it seems to be accompanied by a faint buzzing sound. Anyone from NM will start rolling their eyes thinking about it, but I need to tell you, it was an odd blue too, not white blue like moonlight, but bright blue like emergency lights. Not that bizarre, but ultra blue like LED Xmas lights even. It was almost like I imagined the quality of light when you're underwater, in one of those impossibly blue Caribbean bays, shimmery and immersive, but not particularly intense. So I'm pretty interested at this point, and not only a small bit freaked out. Again, I brushed it off, dismissing my anxiety as a result of God knows what. It persists and seems to be getting closer and louder. The blue never seemed to get any brighter, but seemed to become clearer. It's very hard to describe because what happened next dominates my memory for the next few minutes so strongly that I'm not sure what happened right before. What I saw was a wall of blue light moving between each of the walls of the gorge. I couldn't tell if it ended with the river or extended beyond it. Now, the Rio Grande isn't particularly deep at this or any point, so it wouldn't have made a difference really, but the buzzing was definitely coming from the wall of blue or slightly above it. I still had no clue what was happening. I realised that I'd better bolt out of the gorge, lest I find the detail of what this thing is. I grab my gear, throw everything unceremoniously into my bivvy, then boogie along the river until I get to the ridge where the Hondo meets the Grande River, about half a mile, dragging all of my equipment behind me like toys in a pillowcase. I had no car. A friend and his girlfriend had driven me there from Albuquerque and dropped me off while I spent the weekend there, whining and dining in Teos 94, so definitely no cell phone. I get to the bridge and this is where things get really off the deep end. On the bridge is an old man, looks Kiowa, on a horse, wearing an old black velvet boss of the plain style hat, poncho, cloak, saddle blanket over his torso. Interestingly, moreover, he's just parked there on his horse looking north. Now looking at the wall of light, I yell out hey, but there's no response, basically noping out of there. I started to run and stumble along the road to the east, along the Rio Hondo and hopefully towards something or someone not freaking me out. The buzzing's now louder. I look back and I'm only about 20 yards away from the bridge. The man on the horse finally looks at me. Our eyes met and I flipped out. No other reason than feeling complete and utter repulsion. I knew I wasn't supposed to be here now, walking backwards, keeping my eyes on the bridge. I was fixated on the man on the horseback trying to fight the urge to turn my back on him and run in for the wind. I don't. I see him raise a hand out with his palm to the light. It then stops immediately, the buzz trails off and a bottle of rocket type blue light shoots up into the sky. I look back at the guy and no old guy on a horseback is there. It's possible that he got his horse to turn around very quickly, but it shouldn't be possible. Now this was almost 20 years ago and I still have no explanation for what I saw. I'd loved if it was all an hallucination, but I think it's very unlikely. I don't believe in supernatural or paranormal, but I seriously don't know what to make of this encounter. I never have. Now I live out in Australia and there's plenty of creepy things in the bush, but here's some that stood out for me. The first is when my car is getting serviced in an industrial area and the quickest route to walk there from my house was cutting through bush, typical Australian bush. There was a vague track to follow which then disappeared, but I knew eventually I'd end up back in suburbia. But in the middle of the bush, on a cliff top was a large round 2 meters across man-made opening, which on closer inspection was like a well linked with bricks, about 10 meters deep. It had a steel gate over the top to stop people falling in, but it really looks like something in the ring. I hurried out and left, quickly going to where my car is to ask about it, and they were very vague and didn't really want to say anything. I eventually found out it was a temporary place to house convicts who were building the road across from the Blue Mountains. The guards were worried they'd run away at night, so they would keep them in the well so they couldn't escape. Apparently it opened up to a large room at the bottom. 2. Camping beside a river as with my mum in an area of South Blue Mountains. We're the only ones there, apart from a farmhouse. The farmhouse is around 1 kilometer or 2 away. Now randomly, in the middle of the night, a guy appears and starts ranting about the need for us to protect him from wild dogs. He was wearing a blue weird shirt and tattered clothes, and my mum told him that you must go, but he wouldn't. Eventually we said that we're going to bed, but he sat outside near our tent with a huge knife. I remembered my mum saying that he's not going to kill us, but I didn't believe it. The next morning, He was gone, and we went up to the farmhouse to tell them, and they said, "Oh, you must have met him. He means well, but he lives far from here. I'll have a word with him to stay away." The next night more tourists came and everything was fine. We went home and don't think much of it. A few months later, a guy was arrested not far from where we were on suspicion of being connected to several missing people. The moment I saw him, I recognized him on the news. Turned out that the guy was arrested and was exactly the person we saw who actually murdered hitchhikers along the highway heading south and buried them in a forest on the other side of the river. So about a year and a half ago, my girlfriend went down to a state park that we frequently go as we only live about an hour away. It's one of the best parks within a day trip reach for us to hike and swim and explore in general. So the one day we get bored of the normal hiking areas and decide that we're going to drive around the back roads and go deeper into the woods. No map, we're just deciding which way to turn when we get to intersections and go from there. We passed a random old cemetery that I remembered couldn't have been more than a mile or so down the road before we noticed a dilapidated road with a chain in front of it so cars can't go in, and we decided to park the car and go and explore the area in general. There were no signs for no trespassing or anything like that, so we continue. Now I'll never forget the weird feeling that I had as soon as we go in there. You kind of get the sense that you're not meant to be there, but listen, it's not a bad area really. It seems like a beautiful secluded place, and we decide that we should go in further before we notice an abandoned visitor centre that obviously had been there for a long time. Now it's really weird there. About 100 feet away from walking up to the building, and the alarms begin to go off in my head, saying you shouldn't be here. But my girlfriend at this time is freaking out internally. She wants to leave as she feels uneasy and unwelcome to go where we are as well. But I want to explore the building because I love abandoned places. In the time of walking up, I realise that the woods are silent. I can't hear bugs anymore, no chirps or birds even. Not even branches in the wind. We get to the building and my girlfriend is pleading that we go back. I said let's just take a step further in. I'm approaching the stairs to the door from the left side, and no joke, straight out of a cheesy horror movie, a bird flies out of a window. Not 5 seconds later I hear the sound of a log or very large branch breaking on the other side of the building. Now it's so loud, and this tree must have been so huge that a large creature would have had to slam it directly into the other side of the building. I then pull out my pistol and walk quickly backwards facing the building as I told my girlfriend to walk quickly and get back to the car. So for my question for this whole mini stories, here's some facts about this place in general. Native used to live in this area back then. Black bears reportedly live in the area, though you don't really see them often. Now, there's a possibility that we come into contact with another human there. I think this is really unlikely though because of how loud the thing was when it crashed into the side of the building. I have read some stories about Appalachian folklore and wendigos and crawlers and such, so I'm not sure whether it was one of them. I'm just happy I had my gun with me at the time and I didn't have to find out what this was, because even if it was just a black bear we'd be in trouble. Now I was about 11, my sister was 13, and we slept in the living room of a little caravan we used to stay in near Stranraer. There wasn't a lot to do. The campsite didn't have any amenities. I'd pass the time by playing with my sister, and I would also take walks and play stands. This was 98, so Donkey Kong and stuff weren't really that nostalgic yet. They were just lame. I couldn't wait to go home and to get back on my PC so I could get my theme hospital on. But mostly I'd read. I had a collection of books about ghosts, UFOs, cryptids and such. I picked them up at a library sale or in charity shops. My favourite were just the unexplained true stories like the Dover Demon or Girlfriend's Incident. There was a lot of quarry on the other side of the site. Sometimes I'd pretend to be two red lights and even pretend I was a Mothman, pretending I'd swoop down and terrorize my family. What I'm getting at here is I was a kid, but I never really believed in anything spooky happening to me. If something out of the ordinary was going to happen, I wouldn't really believe it. Now I woke up around 6:20. It's grey outside and the sun had just come up, but fog and cloudy skies ensured it wasn't too bright. I felt uneasy because I'd usually sleep till 9 at least. Now it was silent, and my sister was even snoring as she usually did, and then I heard it. Two thud sounds. It sounds like a horse galloping. It's partially outside of my window. It was unsettling to say the least. Had a horse escaped from a nearby field? Surely not. I'd never seen any around here, and what's more, it didn't snow enough to be one. Now whatever it was making circles around the caravan. I'd hear a faint little sound as it looped around where my parents slept, and it would get louder, almost like next to my head. It had the irregular rhythm of a gallop, but I definitely never heard four legs, however. It sounded like a person skipping around really quickly, but nobody could be this heavy. Thud, thud, thud. It was fading off into the distance, and seems to have ran off, and I breathed a little easier. What a crazy situation. Maybe I hadn't fully woken up yet and was having a weird dream. And then it comes back, thud, 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 getting louder and more consistent. I decided to take my chances, saying to my sister, "Are you awake?" "Yeah," she said, quivering. "Can you hear it?" "Yeah, what is it?" "I don't know. I'm afraid to look out." "Why?" "I don't know what it is." She moaned in fear, hearing thud, 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 and there was a thump on the other side of the caravan, like whatever it was had grazed it. I pulled my blanket tightly over me. After about a minute it faded again, and I told myself I had to look outside, this has to be a demon. But it didn't come back. My parents woke up around 8 and made breakfast, and as the fog cleared, we said to them, "Have you heard anything strange?" And they haven't. There were no escapes on the caravan that would suggest something heavy went into it. Apart from my sister, there was no evidence that anything was ever there, except for one roof footprint outside of the door, shaped like a hoof. To this day, I regret never looking outside to see exactly what it was. Everything was so strange, and I still don't understand why it happened. This happened over a year ago. Our oldest son, Camden, was 3 at the time, and our youngest son, Connor, was around 5 months old. It still gives me chills and still makes me uncomfortable even walking by it. It was January evening in PA. It was dark outside with a couple of inches of snow on the ground. We had just finished eating dinner, and I planned on giving our little one a bath. My husband drives trucks for work, so isn't home very often. It is me and the boys during the week. Now Caden's in his room playing with a toy at the time, and there's a sliding door leading to a deck. A little detail, we have no sensor or even porch light on that side of the house. At the time, we didn't use the deck at all, only to use our grill during the summer months. It is not close to the sidewalk or the next street over though, so basically it's an open space of yard off that deck. Anyway, Caden was playing in his room, waiting for his turn to have a bath while I brought Connor into the room. We were just about done with the bath time when I heard Caden's little feet running towards the bathroom. He stands away from the door and says, "Mum, there's a man looking in the side door. I think it's a mailman." Now my heart skips a beat because 1, no mailman's coming at 7 PM, and 2, the side door, as he called it, was never used. Especially not in the winter. I didn't hear a knock. I began to sketch myself out, more by thinking about how there's no light there, and one person is literally gonna have to walk through the yard in the snow, walk up the back stairs of the deck, and go to that door where the front porch light was on. So now I take Connor out of the bath, put him in a towel in his little chair, and told Caden to sit with his brother and not to come out until I said it was okay. He was confused but listens, just keeps asking what's wrong. I grabbed the biggest knife I can find, had 911 ready to call, and go get my mum a bare face on. When I walked to the side door, I shined the flashlight on my phone through the window of the door at a distance, walking up to it hopefully to scare someone away from it. Now the absolute worst fault that I have with this as a mother is that as I reach for the handle, it's unlocked. Someone could have walked right in. I flung the door open, shined my light, held up my knife and yelled "Hey!" in the most threatening voice a 5'4", 120-pound woman could make. There were footprints in the snow up the deck stairs and going down into the field and woods behind our home. I slammed the door, thoroughly freaked out, and locked it. I called the police and waited in the bathroom with the boys. While I was in there, I asked Caden, "Do you know who that man was?" And he said no, but he smiled and waved for a long time. I asked him what he was wearing. He said it looks like a mailman's uniform. The police officer came and searched the property with flashlights before coming inside. He asked me and Caden questions, and then informed me that he not only saw footprints leading up to the side deck, but to the door of our basement and kitchen window on the other side. He then suggested that I have someone come and stay with us for the fortnight, and they're going to continue to follow the footprints that are left in the snow into the wood line. My father-in-law slept on the couch that night, with his guns being the closest relative to our house. My mother was a nervous wreck. I got very little sleep that night, and I never heard back from the police. I'm assuming the tracks were loose through the woods. Caden still mentions it from time to time, but I'm just terrified of this now. I pray it never happens again. This happened a while ago, so my recollection can't be word for word, but here it is. I'm a teenager. Me and my mum live alone. We basically live in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town is a little less than an hour away, and even being close to a gas station is a very hard thing to find here. We're literally miles away from anything. I know everyone who lives near me, and we rarely ever see new people in our area of the woods. So just seeing someone who isn't familiar is suspicious enough. So this is pretty creepy. Now a couple of years ago, it's the middle of the night. Me and my mum are night owls. We like to be awake from midnight to 6 AM, the period that most people are asleep for. My mum was watching TV in the living room. I was using the computer in the kitchen. The kitchen and the living room are basically connected, so I wasn't too far away from her, only a few feet. The front door leads to the living room. It's a door with 9 windows, so it's pretty easy to see in. My mum looks towards the door, and she saw somebody staring at her through the window. He's wearing a hood that obstructed almost all of his face, and my mum jumped, and she of course walked into the door, asking him what the hell's he doing. According to my mum, He looked pretty young, but she could barely see his face. The man said something along the lines of, "Can you help my car, please?" in a tone I can only describe as miserable and off-putting. Even though it was dark out, there should have been a light from the car. She can see there's no car, and the man's holding his pockets really tight. My mum said no and apologised, causing him to grip whatever's in his pocket even tighter. So tight it makes his arm tremble. He stayed for a few more minutes and then swiftly disappeared. Throughout the night, maybe 1 or 2 hours later, we'd hear slight weeping, but we didn't see anyone at any of our doors or windows. Now I may be making an assumption here, but I can only assume it was a weapon he was holding in his pocket. This was a creepy as hell experience. It's safe to say that he was blatantly gonna lure my mum out of the house to do God knows what to her. A year ago, there was a very small metal plate jammed between the front door strike plate and the piece that goes inside of it. We have no idea how this got here, but the metal stopped the doors from locking. So I'm assuming it was put there so someone can get in later. I'm worried these things are related. I hope this never happens again. I was home alone in my previous apartment in a not so great neighbourhood. My apartment was on the ground level and my bedroom's facing a back alley. A dumpster sat less than 2 car lengths away. Homeless people often rummage through it. Now just before dawn one morning, I hear a tapping on the window. My back was to the window, my eyes are now wide open. It's still dark outside, and I sleep with my lamp on, and my worn out vertical blinds are missing a slate, causing a gap. So now it's clear in my mind that whoever or whatever the source of the tapping could now see me lying in bed, plain as day. The tapping was brief, maybe 5 or 6 taps. So I spent the next 5 seconds or so frozen, bizarrely trying to convince myself it was something/anything else but a person watching me and tapping on my window. Please God, let it be an animal. But then, more tapping. Now I was faced with the terrifying reality that someone had been watching me through my window in the dark for God knows how long, and he'd decided to tap on the window. Had one of the homeless people become aggressive during their dumpster dives? Something told me that nothing good was going to come from this. Now remember, my back was to the guy, so I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, pretending that I'm too groggy to hear him. I stand up hazily, made my way out of the bedroom as I was going to the bathroom or something. Once I was out of his sight, I ran to the phone and dialed 911, considering whether to forget my embarrassment of being in my t-shirt and underwear, and bolting out my front door, which is out of sight from the intruder. I just wasn't sure if I could outrun whoever it was, or whether anyone would help me if I couldn't. Before I make a decision, I hear a loud pop of my window being pried open. I thought my heart would jump through my chest. At the same time, I could hear my upstairs neighbour Mike descending down his stairs. I opened my door a few inches and peeked out to ask for his help. Mike's a big guy, and I heard he was trained in martial arts of some sorts. He didn't hesitate to respond, hustling to the back of my apartment to see what's going on. Within seconds, I heard rumbling and someone being thrown against a wall to the bushes. A few moments later, Mike came out to my front door telling me not to worry again. He'd beaten him up pretty bad. I wanted to believe Mike, that the would-be intruder was maybe dumpster diving, but that he would never do so again. But it gets worse. It wasn't a homeless person according to Mike. When the guy escaped, he ran to the front of my building, hopped into a red sports car and sped off. My neighborhood isn't a red sports car kind of place. The police later told me that the intruder's likely someone who's seen me before and is stalking me. So window tapper, I still wonder what would have happened if you got inside and Mikey wasn't there to intervene. I don't know if you still follow me, and because of that, I'm scared. This encounter happened when I was about 10. My sister and I were home alone since it was during the summer. Both our mum and my grandmother were busy, so they could not stay at home with us. We were used to being home alone during the summer, so it's no big deal. The only thing we could do was not go outside or open the door to anyone. During this day, I had gotten up and started to play Sims 2 in our kitchen. My sister was watching TV in our den. A few hours into our game, I hear the doorbell ring. At first I thought it was my game, but I have the sound off. So I asked my sister if she heard the doorbell ring, and she replies she hasn't. She said it was probably just a show she was watching. I brushed it off and went back to my game. About 10 minutes later, I see a reflection on my computer of a man in a suit, his hands cupped around his eyes, looking through the glass door behind me. I turn around to be face to face with this strange man that I've never seen before. I had no idea how long he'd been there watching me. He waved at me like he knew me from somewhere. I call my sister's name, and the man hasn't been noticed by her yet. She grabs the phone quickly to call out to her grandmother. Now, we had seen the salesperson before. None of them look like this guy. He's wearing a full black suit that doesn't fit him. It was not strange enough that this guy was wearing a full suit in 99 degrees. He was also carrying a briefcase. All the salespeople I'd seen only ever carried a clipboard and some flyers. But this guy, a briefcase. All the salespeople had also come at different times of the day. The next flag that came with this guy, he walked around our house coming to the back door, which during his little trip, you would have seen that there's not a car in the driveway, indicating no one's home. As I was getting up to hide, the man reaches down, grabbing the doorknob, beginning to jiggle it forcefully. Thank God it's locked. He now begins to smile, gesturing at me to come unlock the door for him. All the noise he had been making had now set off our 75-pound lab mix, making her go crazy. No way was she gonna let the guy off. My sister tells my grandmother, and apparently she's on her way. She wants us to hide in the back of her house until she could get home. My sister hands me the phone, then turns into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we have. I can hear her yelling at the guy that we called the cops. She comes back into the room and we shut the door. She tells me after she lied to the guy about calling the cops, but he starts laughing. A little while later, we hear the door open and my grandmother calling us. We come out to meet her. She tells us that she did not see a man anywhere in sight. She had walked around the whole house before unlocking the door. She also thought it was weird if he was a salesperson, he wouldn't have stayed around. She ended up taking the rest of the day off to be with us. Also, she could watch us now in case he comes back. It's been 11 years since this encounter took place and I still have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. I was camping in northern Ontario not far from Sudbury. Camp was a few hours hike from a gravel road that come off a road near Tilton Lake. It was about 15 of us hiking back after 2 days camping when we find ourselves in a clearing and decide to stop for a water break and let the group catch up. While waiting, we hear somebody yelling help. It sounded like a woman screaming for her life. More than half of the group just circled up, and while most people were now crying of fear, a few of us pulled out knives and started a fire. We called the police over the satellite phone with our coordinates. The two of the group continued down the trail to guide the cops to the clearing while we waited and tried to calm those crying. The shrieking stopped after 15 minutes of repeating itself, and it suddenly went silent, very creepy. Maybe about an hour later, 6 cops actually arrived with shotguns and come down the trail and told us to wait while they investigate. All they found was bone fragments and lots of blood. They escorted us back to the highway later in the year and called the back of the trip leader to let them know the blood they tested come back as not belonging to humans. We also found on the internet that deer and similar animals can make a screech that sounds like somebody saying help. We all agreed that it was 99% likely that what we heard was a black bear killing a deer or something, but you can never be sure. Now my younger sister, who's in her early 20s, was in Colorado last year and went hiking with her friend. The plan was to hike up the mountain, stop midway and camp, then finish the hike the following morning. They started their hike and stopped from Camp Midway. She said it started dumping rain, which meant that the top would be very snowy. The next morning, they continued their hike, but it starts to get complicated. Her friend only wore some sandals and wasn't really properly prepared with hiking boots as they didn't expect the snow. They stopped at a creek and were deciding if they wanted to turn back onto account because they weren't really prepared for anything dodgy happening up there when they hear a faint "help me." They both stood still, and they hear it again. They decide to follow up the creek to the woman's voice. They get to a clearing that was covered in snow and found a woman laying in a basic athletic clothes with leggings, light pullover jacket and athletic shoes. My sister said her legs were swollen, discolored and have nasty cuts on them. My sister said, "How long have you been out there?" And she said, "Only a few hours." My sister was like, "Okay, we need to get you down the mountain." And she was like, "No, I need to go up the mountain, that's where my car's parked." My sister was like, "No, there's no driving access to the top of the mountain," which was a sign that this woman was confused. They got her down the mountain and my sister kept saying how confused she was. They got to the bottom and they find the woman's car. My sister couldn't get cell service to call 911. Anyway, my sister tells this woman she's going to drive her to hospital, but the woman is standing strong, that she would just like to go back to her bed and breakfast. My sister takes her there while driving the woman's car. Once the woman is in the bed and breakfast, she thanks them and goes in. My sister spoke to the owners and was like, "You have to call a medic, she's very confused and not normal." They call a medic and transport her to hospital. It turns out she's from Chicago, has low blood pressure, and it was her first time ever hiking a mountain and she was alone. She had passed out during her hike. Then it dumped snow on her and she was hypothermic. Even though she was convinced she'd only been out for a few hours, she'd actually been there overnight alone. I can't imagine the terror she must have felt. Anyway, my sister went and saw her in hospital and the woman thanked her for saving her life. We have a camp that we visit during the hunting months and about every other weekend in between that. To get to our camp, you have to turn off a major road onto a gravel road, drive about a mile, then turn onto another gravel road for about half a mile. It's set between a few other camps, plus some residents live out there. It's quiet mostly. There are some coyotes and bobcats. Bobcats are the worst due to their horrible scream. It sounds like a woman crying for help. There has also been a black panther and wild dogs. In 2013, we're at the camp for Thanksgiving. We hunted, fished, cooked, drank, all the good camping stuff. At night time, we're sitting around a fire, swapping funny stories and just listening to the silence of the woods. As we're talking, we hear "Help me." At first we think it's a bobcat. We listen for some time and hear it again, and it's a man yelling "Help me" frantically. Now our first instinct was to grab our guns. Second was to go towards the voice, but you never know what you'll encounter out there. It was dark and cold. The hunters knew the area very well. We called the police and explained everything to the responding officers. The weird part was that we never once heard it again while the officers were with us, not once. The officers left and we heard the man again, repeating "Help me." About an hour later, the officers come back and we didn't hear any more calls for help. Again, silence. We all decided it's best to go in our camp for the night, and we never found out exactly who or what was making that sound. Now, about 20 years ago, me and a good friend of mine decided to go camping out into the great wilderness. There was a beautiful national park that wasn't too far from where both of us lived that my buddy offered to drive over to, and I couldn't say no. These are some of the best times in my life, and I love to be out in the middle of nowhere with just me, my friend, and a campfire. Now, we'd done this lots of times before. I used to go out there with my friend's dad who used to serve in the army, and he'd always tell us all these cool stories. Now, he had one weird story that he shared with his son that I think is quite creepy. Apparently, when his dad was on service somewhere in a desert, they kept having reports of a strange night creature that nobody could really explain. For a long time they thought it was some of their other soldier friends playing a trick on them, but one day he encountered it and he still doesn't know what to think of it. Apparently, he was out on one of the night patrols when he saw this thing. He described it as a very tall stick figure, kind of moving in a weird limped fashion through the desert. When you got close to it, apparently, you would feel very lightheaded. My friend's dad apparently screamed at it to stop, thinking it was some kind of weapon that the enemy had they didn't know about. He said he was 1 second away from pulling the trigger on this thing when it vanished. He said they were quick to get back into their vehicle and make it back to the base, but just as he went to get back into it, he felt a large thud on his back. He felt a shock of pain go through his back and then he passed out. Apparently when he woke up, a large cactus had been thrown into his back. Now the thing that none of them understood was that there was no people around to have actually thrown this, and how could somebody throw a cactus without hurting themselves? Apparently, my friend's mum had actually seen the scars on my dad's back too when it was more visible, and she says that he always seems horrified when he tells the story. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. Now while we were driving out for our trip, we were both very excited because we've both been pretty busy with college and we needed the break really. Now my friend's car wasn't very good. The radio didn't even work and the doors wouldn't lock. We didn't have an issue with this because sometimes we would camp in it overnight if we couldn't get the tent set up, and we thought it was more convenient. Now this was an older car, even back in the day, so you couldn't actually unlock it or lock it electronically, so if anything it was more convenient for us. Now as we're driving, we notice a strange van behind us. It's pretty hard to see because it was just keeping out of sight from us, but every so often it would come very close to us, so much so that we'd actually think we were going to crash. Eventually it would tail off further in the distance, but eventually it went out of sight and we continued on our way. Now we must have drove for a good 4 hours to get to the campsite, and we were just happy to get there. We eventually closed the doors and I told my buddy, hey, don't forget to lock it, jokingly. knowing that he has no way to, and he says, "Oh, don't worry, I'll keep it safe." He goes off and finds a stick and leaves it ajar against the door handle, forcing it shut. We both laugh and we gather our things and head off into the woods. We were actually quite happy at the time because we realised that there's nobody else about but us. This actually makes it more interesting because you don't have to worry about other people coming and disturbing your campsite. And if anybody's there, they probably really shouldn't be, so you kind of have that advantage. We walk about 2 minutes into where we need to go, and I take one last look at the car. I don't know why I just decided that it's a good idea to turn back. As I look back, I'm sure I can see the van parked up just further in the distance, but I can't really tell. I turn around and look at my friend who's walked off a bit further, and I call him to come back. I say, "Hey, look at the..." Oh, nothing. The van's now gone and I don't want to feel stupid, so I say, "Oh, it's nothing, let's go." And we continue onwards. We walk across a small bridge, careful not to slide in because it's not designed very well, and we think it's strange there's something white which is polluting the water. We've never really seen anything like it before, but we just think it's bizarre, because surely with running water there shouldn't be anything like this here. But we continue on. We continue walking round a bend and past a big tree and walk through the more thick forested area. Now we can hear some voices just off to the right, and we're certain that there's somebody fishing over there. We decide not to disturb them or say anything and keep walking. We eventually make it up towards a big hill area and continue on through the trees. We decide that if there are actually people fishing here, we don't really want to be near them while we're camping, so decide to go even further. I think it's pretty odd because there's no cars at the time, but hey, who knows how they got here? Maybe the aliens come and drop them off. So we continue onward. We continue, and I can't shake the feeling that something's just off, almost like there's some kind of impending doom. I don't actually say anything to my friend because I don't want to worry him, and I think I'm just being paranoid, but it's a really bizarre feeling. It's one that I've not really had here before. We eventually make it over to our campsite, and we think there's probably some animals here because we can still hear strange sounds around us. It sounds like rustling every so often, but we've got to set the campsite up, and that's what we do. I decide I need to go and get some wood for a fire, so I go off from my friend for a while. I continue down a path, and I turn back and see my friend just standing there staring at me. I think it's weird my friend's watching me going down because I just need to get some wood, but maybe he's impatient and trying to hurry me, I think. So I decide to go further down just to get some more wood. I get quite a lot now, and I go to stop for a little while on the bridge. Now it's another small bridge with a stream running under it, and I think it's quite peaceful here. As I'm standing here, I hear a screeching sound. It's enough to scare me so much that I actually drop all of the wood, and I'm actually really annoyed at myself. Why the hell did I let an animal scare me that much? And there's all my wood gone. I don't think much of it, and I just turn back to get some more wood. After gathering up enough things, I end up turning back in the direction that I've come from, back up the path through the hill where I can find my friend. Now annoyingly, with nightfall setting, I'm actually a little bit lost now, and I can't figure out where my buddy is. I actually cursed myself because I've realised that the only way I know to get back is through quite a thick part of the forest that I'm actually kind of scared of. I decide I should just try and jog as much as I can until I find my buddy again. I don't really want to call out and bring attention to myself because of the people fishing, but I feel like I should just jog. So I'm jogging down the path, making sure that I block the branches and twigs in front of me because they keep slapping me in the face. God, what was that? One of them slaps me right across the arm and it's thorny. I think, Jesus Christ, as I've actually got to pull some of the thorns out of my arm. I get a short burst of adrenaline and decide to sprint a bit now, and click. My right foot thuds into something and I fall over, dropping all of the wood. I'm now quite muddy and really furious. I get so angry that I don't actually care about anything else other than getting back. I grab all of my wood and decide that I have to keep going now. I scream out, "If anybody's there, could you just get the hell out of here and leave me alone?" Trying to shake off my nerves. And then I hear footsteps leaving behind me. I'm convinced that it was just from where I fell over and some of the trees are going back to normal, but if it's an animal, I've definitely scared it off, so I continue back the way I've come from now. I eventually make it back to roughly where my friend should be, and I can hear him screaming for help. It's weird because it sounds identical to my friend but different somehow. All I know is that he's in danger and I'm not sure whether somebody's close to him trying to hurt him, so I say, "Hey, I'm coming," and I sprint as fast as I can. And then, just round the corner, I can see my buddy sitting with the campfire going. He says, "Hey, what's wrong?" I say, "God, what happened to you? Who's there?" He says, "What? I've just been sitting here waiting for you to come back." I say, No, were you not just screaming for help a minute ago?" My friend looks at me and slowly shakes my head. I run over and quickly throw some more sticks onto the fire and say, "No, I just heard someone screaming for help." He says, "Come on, just knock it off. I don't want to be paranoid now." I say, "No, seriously," and my friend looks at me really weirdly. We eventually drift off and I manage to put my paranoia aside and wake up pretty refreshed the next day. When I wake up, I speak to my friend and he says, "Hey, did you hear anything last night?" I say, "No, not really, why's that?" And my buddy swears to me that he could hear something faintly in the distance calling out for help. He says he was half asleep, so he's not sure whether it was actually real or not, but I tell him, "What was it saying?" He said, "Well, just help." I look at him weird to confirm that this is roughly what I heard. We don't say anything else and we continue for the day. We actually have a pretty great time. We ended up going on a hike on top of quite a big hill and really having a good time there. We drink a couple of beers and watch the sunset in the distance. We both agree that it's probably a good time to get back now, and we hear it again. The same screaming sound, screaming for help. This time it sounds much closer and more frantic. I look at my friend and he looks back at me and we realise that we've got to get out of here. We very quickly make our way back down the hill very carefully. I clumsily again fall once more, but I'm able to catch myself this time and my buddy pulls me up. We make it down the hill and back past the small stream and eventually back up to our campsite. We look up ahead and we can see an animal just in the clearing off to the side, which quickly scurries off just as we get towards the path and the direction of it. We eventually make it back, put out the fire and grab up all of our stuff and head back. Now we're actually more worried about running into people that might be fishing or something that think we're crazy, and we don't want them to be armed and maybe take a shot at us thinking it's dangerous, so we decide to walk normally. We ended up coming into a clearing, so we both feel relatively safe here because we can see quite well with the moonlight. And there's nothing really to worry about, but we can still hear it, something screaming out for help repeatedly. It goes away for a while, but it continues coming back. It doesn't leave us. Not even until we get back to my friend's car. And what's weirder is that we both jump in and realise that the sticks moved that my friend jokingly put on the door. That either means that it fell on its own, which I think's unlikely because he jammed it in there, or something or someone's been in the car. We have a quick search round and don't find anything. My friend decides that he has to go over to the ranger station and get them to contact the police and investigate, and that's what we do. As we drive off, we can still hear the faint screams for help. We ended up making it into the station and reporting in what had happened, and the police are dispatched to go and investigate. When we're in there, my friend says, "God, no, I've lost it." I say, "What? What have you lost?" He says, "The watch my dad gave me. I can't find it anywhere." I say, "Oh, no. Do you think someone's stolen it? He says, I don't know. There's no way that I'm gonna lose that, my friend says, as he says he's going back to go and find it. I say, God, you're crazy. He says, no, I'm not going in there. I just want to check the car park again. I hesitantly say sure, and decide to go over there. I let them know before we go that we're going to head back to the car park and we can probably guide them over there, and they say that's fine. On the entire journey back over there, I keep telling my friend that this is a really bad idea and we're more important than the watch will ever be. My friend agrees, but he's convinced he can't lose the watch and he's probably just dropped it on the floor. We eventually make it back over there and we stop the car. We kill the engine and we're suddenly met with this really eerie silence. You can hear the odd cricket and whatnot, but nothing big out there. It's a really creepy kind of silence, one that I didn't notice before, even during the time that we were camping over there. I look around and I can't find the watch anywhere, until my buddy says, oh God, I found it. Why was it under the chair? I look at him angrily and start to laugh a bit, because he just put both of us in danger when the scream happens again. Help, please help. We both look at each other terrified. We decide it's probably not a good idea to drive off now because the police are coming and they might think we're suspicious because obviously they've not met us in person yet. We ended up just holding on to the doors knowing that they won't lock. Now the sound never actually got any closer to us, but it never went further than us too. It continues on and then stops for a few seconds. We can see some headlights coming round the corner and we realise it's the police. We're so glad that the police have arrived to go and investigate. We tell them exactly what's happened and they set out with their flashlights and guns in hand. I think thank God we're not going over there. I actually feel much safer now and the police set out. Now weirdly, the whole time that the police are next to us we don't hear the cries anymore. It's really strange. It's almost like everything goes back to normal. We're watching their lights slowly fade off into the distance when we hear it again. Help, please help. We both just continue holding on to the doors, not saying anything to each other. It's actually quite hard to figure out the direction that the sound is coming from, though we're convinced that it's switched sides now. It's not on the side of the road that we're on, it's on the side opposite to us and the police now. This continues on, just like before, and then stops suddenly. About 7 minutes later the police show up and come back to us and say they can't find anything, but they're going to radio it in for a bigger search. We explain what happened and they look at us a little confused because we didn't hear anything, they tell us. They say we got over there and found your campsite, but no one was screaming for help. We begged them just to stay for a few minutes and listen, but the whole time the police are with us, there's not a sound more. We eventually have to go back, and my friend's just happy that he manages to find his watch again. We decide it's probably best if we stop in a motel for the night because we're both really tired and we're not really looking for a 4-hour drive in this state. So that's what we do. The following day my buddy takes me home and I thank him for the trip and we part ways. My friend never got a follow-up from the police and we don't know what happened, but my God, that was a weird experience. Now I don't want to say it was anything paranormal because I'm sure it wasn't, but the thing that freaks me out is whatever this was intelligent enough not to make sounds when the police was there, and it moved into the opposite direction that the police went. I hope whatever this thing was or person was out there stalking us gets caught. I was once canoeing the boundaries waters between Minnesota and Canada. These aren't your normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes interconnected with each other. Think mini lakes. Now we'd been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week by now. We didn't really have the itinerary, Just planned to boat and camp, fish and live off the land for 2 weeks. We had a GPS and a sat phone to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we're done. Anyway, about a week in and we're set out to canoe for about 2 hours to the next lake. An hour or so in, as we're in the centre of an extremely long and narrow lake, a storm has started to blow in and waves about 2 feet tall have begun. It's too much for our dinky canoes. We pull off to a random clearing on the shore and set up camp in a rush to be not totally thrashed by the rainstorm, and we just set up camp and hunker down for the night. By the next morning it's cleared up, and we started walking up the coast to our lake about 200 feet from our boat, looking for a good fishing spot. We are actually not far from a good campsite, however, it's absolutely wrecked. Trash thrown about everywhere, tent collapsed and torn, clothes on the ground, and at first we're like, was this some bear or something? The more we look though, the weirder things become. For one, the garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep safe from bears, but the whole bag was ripped open despite being 30 feet above the ground. Secondly, literally everything except the canoes are still at the campsite. Clothes, packs, food, rope, pans, you name it, like a serious set of hiking equipment, enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open, mostly the packs, tents and clothes. The other half was totally untouched but thrown on the ground. It was like somebody noped the hell out of there in nothing but just their long johns, ditching hundreds of dollars worth of gear in the process. We waited a couple of hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they hadn't been aware of anybody else or got any distress calls. We just eventually get everything and move camp. Everyone was pretty used to it by a day or so, and we ended the trip early because it seemed like nobody wants to continue. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, firstly thinking it was a bear attack, but there was still food uneaten. I've seen bear attacks on camps but nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go for food, and generally get scared away pretty easily. What sticks in my mind is why is all of their clothes and packs still there, while being half destroyed and the other half being untouched? I still don't understand it. Now the following is my uncle's story. He owned about 150 acres in a remote area of eastern Tennessee. On this land he had a large fishing pond and a stream running through it, and he used to leave lines out at night to pull in a big catfish. The pond was accessible by 2 small game trails through thick patches of wood, and he would need to drive out to the trail entrances from his home near the front of the property and walk about half a mile in with his gear and nothing but a headlamp for light. This was something he did pretty often. My uncle was a lover of outdoors, so this was business as usual for him, and he was a Vietnam vet as well. Anyway, this particular night in July 92, he went out to his pond at around 9:30 to check his lines. As he was doing so, he hears lots of splashing and assumes it was one of the fish jumping. He carried on with what he was doing, and he then hears a low growl. It's a groan that he describes as the sounds of monkeys fighting. Just on the other side of the pond, multiple loud splashes occurred, and he also heard a loud crash in the woods just yards away from his left. He talked about how he immediately sensed panic and was attempting to get visuals using his headlamp, but whatever was producing the sounds was behind tree cover. He said that the woods then erupted with constant sounds of monkeys fighting. He opted to drop his gear and run down the track towards a truck. Apparently, even in his adrenaline-fueled state, he can still hear that he's being hunted. He got to his truck and managed to get out of there and back onto his road back to his home. He went inside and locked all the windows and grabbed a gun and stayed up for the whole night, vigilant. He called my dad the next day, who just kind of laughed it off. Well, for my uncle, whatever he experienced scared him so badly that he put the land up for sale and sold it. Now he would maintain what he saw as he believes is a hunting group of what Sasquatches or some weird creatures we don't know much about that was trying to get him out of there. It truly scared the life out of him. I went out hunting with my older brother and his best friend a few years back, probably 2016. We had been hiking alone on the trail for a good 5 kilometers at least. On one side of the trail is a decent drop and then a river, and then on the other side is a decent uphill section and some huge pine forest. It was about 1 AM by this point, and we were just kind of quietly talking to each other when a horrific noise split through the air. We all froze and looked at each other with the expressions on our face doing all of the work. What was that? We knew it come from up in the pine forest, and we weren't aware of any big predators or anything that could have done this. So we shouldered our rifles and headed to find out exactly what made this sound. I wish we hadn't. We got to a clearing and the trees were thinning, and my brother flicked on his spotlight. It was really bright with excellent range. Way up ahead of us was the strangest looking figure I've seen. I mean, like the general shape of a werewolf, but it was just off. It just stopped on the edge of another tree line further up ahead looking at us, pacing side to side. My brother's friend and I had our rifles trained in trying to get a good look. Now we couldn't 100% count out the fact that it was a hunter's dog that was lost, but we went after it. As we went up after it, it became increasingly obvious that this thing was watching us intently. Then the closer we got, the more we realized it definitely wasn't a hunter's dog. It was big, like really big, and just moved weirdly, with a strange demeanor that was unsettling. We kept 2 rifles on it, and one in the opposite direction, slowly making our way back round, and we haven't been back there since. I was a lone recreation ranger in a small district in southern Idaho. Nearest town from guard station was about 1.5 hours away by car. After moving into the guard station, I realized the solar power was not working, and I haven't slept for about a month due to various factors. I mean good sleep. There was bats in the cabin, something walking on the deck at night. The woods there always had an eerie feeling to them, unlike the southwest Ponderosa forest I was used to. About 2 months into the seasonal job, I started to hear something walking and scratching on the deck at night, perhaps even on the door. Now, this district was known for its badgers and beavers, so I didn't think much of it when leaving the cabin at night, but I always had a weird feeling like I was being watched. One night, I was returning from my grocery run, which always went on Tuesday nights, and I had a bad feeling at that time. I also don't have my shotgun in the vehicle. After stepping out of the vehicle, I looked to the right of the cabin, and about 50 feet from my front door, all I could see is 2 eyes about 3 to 5.4 feet in the air. To say I was freaked out is an understatement. I started yelling, "Get the hell out of here!" but the eyes only crouched down an inch closer. At this point, I could tell it was a large animal of some kind, but definitely not a coyote. I ended up throwing a piece of firewood in the general area, and this creature leaped back a bit, but it didn't make a sound. I ended up throwing more pieces at the creature, still inching forward. At this point, I fumbled with the keys. Of course, the solar power was out again. I managed to get inside and grab my shotgun. I went outside, and the creature's closer. I still couldn't get a good look at it with my crappy headlamp. I loaded the shotgun and continued to throw pieces of wood with the other hand, until finally, the creature decides to go into the brush. That night, I drank about 4 IPAs and slept with my shotgun. In the morning, trail crew come up and we found mountain lion tracks all over the porch, on the rock bedding, and all over the compound leading back to the creek. After that event, I always heard the rock chair move, and somebody or something walking on the porch, but we never found tracks after that point. Considering that it was always muddy up there, it was weird not to find any tracks. Now, I've been stalked by mountain lions before, but never had that feeling in the woods like that time. When I was 6, my babysitter was this nice middle-aged lady and her equally nice husband. My twin brother and I were always at their house in the middle of the summer, and we hung out with the couple's 2 grandkids, another boy and girl sibling set of similar ages. This literally was my happy place. This lady had the best movie collection for a 6-year-old. It was there that I saw The Last Unicorn for the first time, as well as My Little Mermaid, and The Great Mouse Detective, The First Land Before Time, and The Brave Little Toaster. And her husband was a phenomenal cook by a kid's standard. Every day was chicken nuggets and pizza day. They had kid-sized 4-wheelers, a huge pool, and a huge kids' playhouse and a jungle gym set up in the backyard. And they would always put on the best display for the 4th of July show in the country. 6-year-old me was the happiest girl on the freaking planet. There were some of the wealthiest people in our area too. Neither one of them actually worked, but I didn't care where the money come from. Now one day in midsummer, the 2 boys were being typical boys, and the little girl and I thought they were being mean. In reality, the boys wanted to play war or something, and the girls wanted to play wedding or something similarly stupid, whatever. She and I were sad and refused to play with the boys. Instead, we decided to pick flowers that grew at the edge of the forest. We thought it was baby's breath, but it was really just poison hemlock. So, we were walking along the edge of the dense forest in the middle of the Banjo country in southern Ohio. This was in the 1990s, so we weren't worried about stranger danger because we were just so far out in the country. The adults did worry about animals though, because the next county over had bears and mountain lions, but us 6-year-olds were fearless. We ended up walking onto the neighbor's property picking these flowers when we found a break in the tree line. It was an old, well-torn path leading into the woods. For some reason, she and I decided to ditch our flowers and take the path into the woods to see where it led to. The path itself was unremarkable, well worn but unmaintained, as there was tree roots growing up through the path in places. We come upon a little bridge at one point. We were both a little confused about it because we had been told that there were no creeks in our area, yet here was a bridge. It wasn't a particularly old bridge too, but the creek bed under it was dry as bone. Weird, we thought, but keep going because why not? I'm not sure how far we walked beyond the ridge, but we ended up in a clearing with some stones all around in a circle. The clearing was big enough that there was a gap in the trees that allowed sunlight in, and in the middle of the circle was a massive stone-walled well. It was big enough that there were stairs built into the dam walls in a huge spiral. My friend was mesmerized by the well there. She found a rock and thrown it in, and we never heard it hit the bottom. As we were searching for more rocks to throw in, I was rooting around in the brush by some bigger stones and actually looked at big ones. These were not normal stones, no. I was a smart cookie, already reading at 3rd grade level before the summer of 1st, so I could read the stupid stones. These were names and dates cut into it. We're in a graveyard in the middle of the woods far away from everyone. I remember getting chills realizing this. Moments later, my little friend got really quiet and poked me. She pointed to the edge of the clearing on the other side of the well. Thankfully, not the side that we had entered the graveyard on. My little heart would have exploded, I think. She was pointing at a dark shape just staring at us in the woods facing us. We both stood up very slowly and stared into the darkness. At some point, the little girl took my hand and tried to get me to leave, but I can't move. The fear was paralyzing. It didn't move until the clouds covered the sun, and our bright, inventing clearing became slightly shadowy. Then the shape moves. It was an adult shape in size, wearing long dark robes with a hood over its face. We were stupid kids, but weren't that stupid. We both turned tail and ran as fast as we could. My friend was faster than me because I was a bit chunkier, so she made it to the bridge. I wasn't far behind her. I looked back after we got over the bridge, and that person was standing at the edge of the bridge just staring at us. I screamed and wet myself and kept running. I tripped over a tree root in the path, ripping my pants and shredding my knees in the process. I scrambled up and kept running. We burst out of the trees like our hair was on fire, screaming and crying. We make a beeline towards the girl's grandpa's house. Her grandfather was in the backyard planting something and came running up when he heard us. We were absolutely hysterical and wouldn't calm down. We spent hours sobbing while the grandma and grandpa got us bathed and in clean clothes and tried to soothe us. They said no one's out in the woods, and then we become more hysterical. It actually took us months before we'd even go onto the back deck again. Everyone was convinced that we made up the story because of our hyperactive imaginations, but the adults humoured us. The kids, not so much. The next summer, we were forced into the backyard for the annual 4th of July party. Tons of kids. They all knew our story, and one of the teenage boys called it rubbish. He bullied us for hours until we told him where the path to the woods was, and then made us go up with him. Cue another incident of me wetting myself. To my utter relief, when we got there, she and I both remembered exactly where the path was, and there was nothing. Just a heavy growth of hemlock. He tried to wade through it and ended up with chiggers from neck to foot. And he got in a ton of trouble for dragging us down there once we got back. So she and I were relieved not to go back from then on, and all the other kids thought we were liars, so. Fast forward 15 years later, 16 years after this happened, my mum mentioned that the grandpa passed away a few years prior while I was off at school. I was 22 at this point and had mostly forgotten about the events in the woods. I expressed my condolences and asked what happened. I mean, this guy was a friend of my mum's for 20 plus years. My mum started being evasive, so I got curious and pressed her. She said he unfortunately took his own life. And then she told me the bad part. His granddaughter, my friend, was the one that found him. All around him were notebooks with a crazy person writings that had amassed over a very long time, dating back to the 70s, details of his dealings with demons and spirits and other crazy things. He left notes for all his loved ones. The note he left for the granddaughter was actually crazy. It was an apology for leaving her, as it was the only way to protect her and the other people he loved. It seemed that the explanation for their wealth was deals struck with demons. After a few decades of these deals, they started coming to collect the debts the old man owed and whatnot. It was the craziest thing I've ever heard, but it made sense. Everyone wrote the guy off as having a serious mental health issue. They threw the journals away and moved on. But I can't rationalize everything we saw and experienced as some kind of weird psychological reaction to picking hemlock. That wouldn't explain both of us seeing the exact same thing. I know what I saw was real. I don't remember all the details because it was nearly 30 years ago, but I remembered the fear and the scar I still actually have on my knee from falling. I'm not afraid of the woods or anything, but I have a very wealthy respect for the dead, and I know not to mess with them or demons. My friends and I were higher in the woods deep in the Sierra Nevadas in the California backcountry, and decided to travel a few miles off the path to reach a river and shoot at targets with .22. The path is littered with deer bones and claw marks from bears, so we're freaking out a bit, but finally make it up to set up camp. I notice off in the distance, about half a mile upstream the river, there's two men walking towards us in the exact same direction we're firing our guns. I yell at them to stop, and we stop shooting and watch the men, wide-eyed in their late 20s and early 30s, walking quickly alongside the river, when suddenly they both jump in. I should say at this point that the river is moving very quickly and could easily sweep you from underneath if you're not careful. We watch as both men are swept away towards us downstream. One of my friends, who we'll call Mike, decides to be brave and goes to get close to the edge and extends a lump of wood for them to grab. Both men latch on, and Mike is a hero for pulling them to shore. While everyone catches their breaths, we say, "What are you doing?" as it's super remote and they're at least 3 or 4 miles from the nearest trail. They said, "Oh, we were just having fun, just free swimming in the river," while leering at us. Immediately, the hairs on the back of my neck stands up and every fibre in my body tells me that this is not right and this means harm. We tell them that we're going to head back up the trail. They then say, "Oh no, we're coming with you." Given that we're far off from civilization and these guys are clearly off their heads, and not only a danger to us but themselves, we reluctantly agree. It was the most quiet hike of my life. I felt like trying to fill out if they could take us in a fight. There were 3 of us and 2 of them, but we had a 22, but were young, squirrely adults. I don't know how to explain it, but the hike had us constantly positioning against each other with our body language without ever fighting directly. They would get close to the gun. They would try to both be near it, then we would then counter them by going in between the gun again while trying to act natural. And by the way, the path is littered with bear marks and whatnot. We finally made it to the car and they decided that we aren't suitable targets and move on. No idea what these 2 random men were doing, risking their lives like this in the Sierra Nevada's freezing river, or why they felt the need to size us up. But I'm glad nothing happened to us. A few years ago, when I was 17, I just graduated from high school and got my first job at a Christian camp near Yosemite in California over the summer. Mainly the people I worked with were great and really sweet Christian college kids, the good kinds. There was one guy though, I would say he's Carl. I didn't frankly like him. He was tall, handsome, charming, had golden curly brown hair and a smile that could stop your heart. His eyes though, they're dead. He never got those little crinkles in the corner of his eyes when he smiled, which suggests that it's not a real smile. It was like the top half of his face died. There were things I did not like about Carl off the bat. His eyes for one, the dead of his smile. He never asked for anything. He tried to twist your arm. He just very softly, very slowly tried to manipulate the situation to feel as though you owed him. Each time, it felt like a part of my brain shut down, like a slamming door, almost like I'm powerless to say no. I get along with most of the little cliques of the camp. No one really dislikes each other. As far as I knew, we just kind of broke off into groups based off what we like into our free time, or who we like the most. Carl though, seemed to make friends one-on-one with a clique. By the time he left the group, it was desolate. They were fighting, not speaking or trusting each other. I know this isn't a lot of evidence, but I'm trying to take a good picture mentally and describe it to you. Now one day, everyone in the camp decided to go friendzone. We tried out a lot of camp food and wanted real dinner, maybe seeing a movie or go bowling. I was off work last. Now, at camp, we had a sign out sheet. Being so close to Yosemite, we often went hiking, so if we had left, we put our name down along with where we're going, when we left and where we should be back, and when. This way, if anything happens, the search teams know where to go. So I put all my info into this sheet and head down to the parking lot. My friends had all divided up into their cars and I jokingly asked if they forgot about me. They said Carl had said I could ride with him. I look around and I don't see Carl, although I seen his name on the sheet. All of the hair on my body stood on end. I was terrified to get in the car with this guy alone. He felt so wrong, just off. Just not right. I don't know how else to say it. My friends were telling me I have nothing to worry about and everything's gonna be fine. I saw Carl walking towards the parking lot with that dead smile on his face, and everything in me was seeming to get scared. I said that I was tired and wanted to stay in tonight, and Carl laid the charm trick on me, telling me what a night it's gonna be. I owed him because of God knows what, with this dead smirk on his face. I refuse. He gets mad. Told me I don't need to be such a horrible person. Finally, everyone figured out that I wouldn't be persuaded. I hugged one of my girlfriends goodbye, whispering in my ear not to ride with Carl back. When they all left, I walked back to the area with the sign out sheets to cross off my name, since obviously I wasn't going anywhere. I saw the sheet, saw where my name was, and my heart dropped. My name had already been erased. Where I live in college, I have to come back a long way to get to home. It's literally states away, so I'm used to driving for hours on my own. This is often through heavily forested roads, with little to no other cars on the journey. Now I don't mind, I just play some podcasts and really enjoy my time normally. However, one night would change that forever for me. So it was the end of semester, and I was ready to set off like normal, and I check my phone and I have a text off my mum. It says, "Be careful." I don't know why I have a really weird feeling about tonight. I laugh about it and think, yeah, she's always paranoid like that, and set off at around 10 at night. I should be home by about 5 in the morning, that means, so I can get in, sleep and enjoy the day with my family. So I set off and all feels normal. I've got my music playing and I'm having a good time. Now I don't know why, I suddenly have this weird feeling come across me. I notice that my radio starts to act up too. Not like normal interference though that I've ever heard before. This is almost like it's being jammed. I just laugh and quickly switch my phone to podcast mode. Aliens are not going to stop me today, I laugh to myself, and I continue onwards. Now as I'm driving, I haven't seen one other car yet, but lo and behold, there's some kind of light as I'm approaching a bend. I slow down thinking it's another car, making sure I don't have an accident. But it doesn't seem to move. I think this is odd. As I get closer, I realise that it's just a torch that's been placed on the side of the road. It's as though a person's just put it there to look like a car's headlights. I think that's really odd, but decide to keep going, thinking maybe a road worker left it there by accident. I don't know, it could happen. Now as I'm driving, I switch the radio again to get a weather update, and I realise that the same jamming type thing is in place. I really don't want to worry myself and think I'm just being paranoid, so I press on. Now that's when I see the same thing up ahead again, except there's two. What giving it away is that one was dimmer than the other, but it was the same orange type of glow that the torch had from before. I'm certain that it's just going to be some road workers doing something, so I decide to slow down and roll my window down to let them know that they've left a torch on up the road and it might be dangerous to other drivers. As I do so, I see some people in high-vis jackets. When I'm slowing down though, I have a horrible feeling that something isn't right. My car slowly comes to a stop, and I decide to put my full beams on. I know some of you are gonna moan at me for this, but I didn't care about temporarily blinding someone to see what was going on. That's when I see it. There's 5 people wearing high-vis jackets, but something looks off about this. I can see that the people in the background are wearing all black and a high-vis jacket. That just isn't right. I'm confused as to what's going on. Why on earth would they wear all black and a high-vis jacket? It's almost like they're not actual road workers, but the two at the front are. I call out and say, "Hello? Are you guys from the government?" And there's no reply. As I'm waiting there, a horrifying grin comes across one of the workers' faces. As my eyes have adjusted to the darkness, I can see that there's more lights in the background. And I can see that the torches have been placed there just the same as before. Then suddenly, I can hear the sound of rustling around me. To my left, I can see that there's a group of people coming from the tree line. And, almost on cue, my headlights go back to normal mode automatically and I can't see the guys in front of me. Just as it goes off though, it gives one flash of light and I can see that the people in the trees are carrying a lead pipe and other objects. This is the most scared that I've ever been in my life, and my fight or flight kicks in. I desperately jam my car into reverse and floor it, panicking not knowing what to do. As I do so, it illuminates the silhouettes of at least 8 other people on the left side of me, waiting, coming to the tree line. As I'm reversing out of there, to my horror, they all come into the road and just stop, staring at me, all dressed in black. What's worse is that as I'm screaming, the light suddenly goes off from the torches and I can't see them any longer. I immediately do the quickest U-turn of my life and start heading in the opposite direction. I'm trying to get through to the police but I've got no signal. I speed the rest of the way home. In a terrified state, I'm crying to my mum. I don't know if they'd followed me or what. I made damn sure to get out of there as quick as I possibly could. I then file a police report. The worst thing? My mum doesn't believe me about any of this. She thinks it was just sleep-induced hallucinations. And that I was so tired I imagined all of it. That was about to change though when the police arrived, and they told me and my mum that they were so thankful for the report, and they've been tracking down a group of people who pretended to be road workers to then try and kidnap people. Apparently someone else nearly got caught earlier in the week, but sped away too when they tried to grab her. It just makes me sick to think that there's people like that out there in the world. But the fact that I was miles into deep forest with no one around to help if I needed it then. It was only God's grace that I spotted them and didn't actually get out. About a month ago, I moved into a house near the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It's very secluded. Everything was great up until about a week ago, when this strange thing started happening. Not like paranormal, just strange. So I knew moving in, I'm gonna have about an acre to myself, which is nice. The acre itself is just about all thick dense woods. Towards the back you can't even go any deeper because the land is too rigid and the trees block a clear path into anything. Now I live alone in this tiny home. My brother and his dog are moving in a couple of weeks. The house is pretty small. It also has a basement with a sliding door to the backyard, which has a tiny little fence that can be knocked down completely if someone's trying to get over it. I decided that I was going to start fixing it up until my brother's dog becomes well trained. Now this is when the first creepy thing happened. I left to go to Lowe's just to buy one classic lump of wood for a fence, just enough to make sure a dog can't get his head over it or leap past it. Now as I was coming back home, I noticed a man on my doorstep, looking inside through my window, even though any person could have heard me pulling into the driveway. He doesn't flinch at all, even when I slam the door shut. Eventually at this point, I kind of uneasily said, "Can I help you?" To which he replied, "I'm just your neighbour and saying hello." I went out of my way to put the wood I was carrying in my hand down on the ground and went to shake his hand, and he didn't move again. He just stared at me. After this weird encounter, I was more just done with him, so I said that I'm very busy and I'm fixing my fence and it's nice to meet him. He stayed at the front of my house though for about another 2 minutes, watching me put all my wood inside the living room, looking into and around my house in the process. I'm thoroughly creeped out now. I just closed the door in his face and went about my business. About 2 days later, into fixing my fence, another woman, this one looking nicer and having put a little appearance into her look, greeted me kindly, telling me about herself. I call her Miss H. Now she started to talk to me, explaining how people don't normally move around here, and I was the first in about 11 years. She went on to explain the rest of my neighbourhood, whom I knew are around the same age as her, like to stay to themselves. After a pleasant talk with Miss H, I asked her, "What's up with the guy that I saw earlier?" She said that, well, he's about 6 foot, which you probably know, old but not too old, probably mid-50s and brown eyes, decent shape and grey hair. Miss H went on to explain that the person who lived here before me was a widow, and her teenage daughter, who was homeschooled, had left because this perv started to stalk her. She got on to say other things about this weird man, and eventually left it at that. Now last night, I thought I heard a tapping on my window at exactly 2:37 AM. I knew this because I looked at my clock. Now my window is a good 4 feet above the actual ground, and below it, I think it's just a figure of a bird or something, and maybe it's casted its shadow trying to get in. But no less than 2 minutes after silence, the tapping become 3 loud bangs. I immediately ran to the closet, grabbed my hunting .22 and hid under my bed. Peeking over, I see a figure looking in. After being scared for my life, I hear the familiar voice of the perv shouting, "I need your help." Not knowing what to do with myself, I threw my curtain open, and the only thing between his forehead and my .22 was a ½ inch of my glass. He didn't say a word. Not "don't shoot me," not "I need help," not "oh hey." He then pointed behind him to the fence. I then ran outside to see what he wanted. I still have the gun on me. I said, "What's wrong?" He said nothing, pointing to my fence. I look over, and this time I saw the fence had seemed to have been run over by a car, with mud tracks everywhere. How on earth had I not heard this? I look at the 50-something-year-old cars, of whom were dirty tire tracks that could have left this. I'm annoyed at what I saw and yell, "What the hell?" And then pull my finger on the trigger, when he finally replied, "That's your fence, isn't it?" Jumped in his car and quickly sped off. It's currently 3 PM on March 2nd, and I've scraped the entire fence idea out of sheer exhaustion and fear. This is really happening right now, and I'm really not sure what to do. What I'm about to tell you happened 2 days ago in southwest Sweden. It was around 5 PM in the afternoon, and I decided to meet up with one of my friends. We have moped scooters, and drove to the grocery store to get a snack for our small trip. After that, we head towards a beautiful sheep pasture that I had been to once and wanted to go to again. It's located maybe 15 minutes away from the center of town. After a while, we come to a narrow road surrounded by a forest, since it rarely drives any kind of vehicles out there. I started to drive in the middle of the road, and sometimes even on the part of the road for approaching cars. One time, when I looked in my mirror, I saw my friend driving close to the edge. At first, I thought she was making a point that I should keep on my part. But then, she drove even closer to the edge, almost going in a ditch. I stop and wait for her to catch up. We're both kind of laughing, and I ask her what happened, and she said, "I got distracted by something weird by a tree and forgot the turn." We laugh and continue. Later, when we sat in the sheep pasture eating our snacks, we started talking about it again for some reason. I asked what she saw, and she described it as some kind of wooden plank that was nailed to a tree, and that it looks like a person with just holes as eyes. My reaction was, "Oh yeah, really?" And we decided to relocate it on the way home. We stop by the roads and I turn off the engine. When I look up, I spotted it right away. It was hanging in a tree, looking dead. Now, I immediately think of some cults that are known to operate in the area. Maybe they were worshipping this. I don't know. I have a picture saved on my phone of this, and I'm really thinking of reporting it to the authorities. Something just doesn't feel right about it though. I have a horrible sense of evil when I look at this. I hope nothing too bad's happened here. I even got told that this could be a grave for something, as part of some of the sacrificial rituals that can take place there. I'm not really willing to go back to find out though. My friends and I are on our way from Chicago back to our friend's home in Evansville, IN. As such, we had to drive through the Midwestern country to get there, pitch black highway surrounded by trees and cornfields. About 4 hours away from home, my friend screams and I look up. We hit a deer going 50. The poor guy just bounces off the front and probably didn't make it upon impact. We come to a stop and decide what to do. We are stranded on a quiet highway in the middle of nowhere, with trees to our right and a few houses a bit far off to the left, all of which are surrounded by cornfields. My friend is standing outside surveying the damage when we hear a scream. It's a man's scream, a bit far off to our left. My other friend and I look at each other, weary-eyed. A few minutes pass and we hear it once again. I then joke about skinwalkers, but we quickly get back into the car. A bit later, we call 911. We then hear another scream, a woman this time. It seems closer now. We're waiting on the deputy and nervously joking about whether it's skinwalkers or crazy elderly people with sundowners for whatever reason. My friend is facing towards the trees and laughs very nervously, rolling up the window. I just heard clicking noises outside my window, and I'm rolling it up because I'm gonna pretend I didn't hear them. So anyway, now we're on our way back, and out of Skinwalker country or whatever the hell that was. For some background, I'm 23 and have lived in the country all my life, growing up on the east side of Lake Winnipeg and moving to the west side as a teenager. This story takes place when I was around 17 and is non-fiction. Now, after years of my family moving, I started dating my boyfriend at the time. I lived within the small town, but my boyfriend lived about 15 minutes out, surrounded by woods. His only neighbour was about a mile down. Now, on a September night, I was at his house watching movies and I wanted to go out for a cigarette at around 2 a.m. He said he didn't want one, but for some reason I felt scared to go outside by myself. Probably because I was really tired and kind of out of it. So I make him come with me. We got out to the front deck in the dark. He's looking at his phone. I'm smoking and enjoying that crispful air when I hear the distant cry coming from the direction of the neighbour's house. It kind of sounded like it could be a dog or coyote. I said to my boyfriend, "What do you think it is?" To which he replied he thought it was the neighbour's dog. We're both leaning against the wall, trying to listen, and noticed that it's slowly getting louder and closer. It then changed in pitch and tone dramatically and become more guttural. It sounded like something kind of human but screeching for its life, but definitely not human. The type of scream that immediately makes you feel sick to your stomach. My blood turned to ice and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Staring at each other, we look around, not saying a word, both thinking the same thing. I don't think it could have been any of the animals that I was familiar with, because I would have recognized them. This was different. It wasn't like the usual animals. I mean, I could definitely withstand them, and this definitely wasn't that. We listened to the awful sounds getting closer and closer for probably like 2 minutes before my boyfriend grabbed my arm, rushed me inside. We never lock our doors where I'm from, but God we did. Even making sure that we actually locked the windows. We jumped into bed freaking out, trying to make sense of what the hell that was, and we still could hear it somewhat from where we are. We lay there silently for about 10 minutes and the screeching just stopped. Obviously we don't sleep much. The next day we drove past our neighbour's house and the dog was fine, just chilling in the driveway. Nothing was out of the ordinary and it never happened again. We ended up breaking up early the next summer, but God, it still freaks me out. I'm a park ranger here and I want to share this story with you all today. And that's just so you know that you should always trust your eyes and visions, even if people try and tell you not to. Let me give some context. I was in a really beautiful area of forest land. It's one that I actually grew up further away from, so I appreciated it more because of this. I've been working here for lots of different years and fell in love with the place. It was really like a second home to me. Now, I always had a good time, even if I was working there during the wintry months. I don't know why, it was just something I'd really enjoyed doing. I didn't like the cold though, that was for sure. I always made sure that I wore lots of different layers during the winter months because the cold is your worst enemy. It can help you find people sometimes if you can track footsteps, but that's only if there isn't fresh snowfall, which hinders it. But the hypothermia was an issue. The other thing too is when it's really cold out there, you have to be careful of getting frostbite, and of course if you're looking for a missing person, if they haven't got a fire going, well, good luck. Now, some of my rangers had actually been calling in to me saying that they had reports of a strange flash in the woods. They couldn't really identify what it was and they were worried it was hunters that were there illegally, and of course it was my job to investigate. Now, I had personally never seen any of these flashes before. We'd actually encountered illegal hunters before, so I was pretty ready to deal with this. You always have to be careful because of course they're well armed, but remember that they're people and you can just talk them down, and normally they're pretty friendly. I was on patrol one day when we had a call out of this strange flash again, and it was my job to go and investigate it. Now, I wasn't really looking forward to this because I'd just left the station, so I was quite nice and warm, and I didn't want to be out there too long. I wanted to get home for something, but I knew my shift was probably going to go over a bit, but hey, it's a part of the job. Now, I wasn't actually too worried about sunlight or anything because at this point it was relatively early in the day, so I didn't have to worry about having enough daylight to be able to do my job. So, I set out on my patrol. At the time, I'm following quite a nice clearing through the trees. Now, you can see some beautiful slight mountainscapes around me, which I think is really beautiful. You can actually hear echoes really well off of these, and I think it makes the whole place look really beautiful. No snow's really falling at the time, only pieces off of other trees, so it helps make this experience more pleasant for me. I get to the first area that I have to cover, and I don't have any signs of hunters. I actually keep frequently calling out in the hopes that I can find them sooner and get back. I then head over to the next area that I need to cover, and there's some really nice trees around me again. These are actually better for me because they're a lot smaller, but if a hunter's in camouflage, I'm not going to be able to see them very well regardless. Even if you've been trained to be out here for years, it's still extremely difficult to spot anything that's concealed, especially animals too. I make my way down to the final search area, and nothing. I decide that I should be still for a while, and I hear a slight clicking sound. I think this is really odd because I haven't noticed it before, but it just feels a little off. I make my way back towards where the vehicle is now. It's quite a walk, so I'm ready for it. I decide to go for a different part of the forest that is actually off of the trail now in hopes of finding the hunters. And there it is, a slight flash just up ahead of me. Now what was weird about this is it seemed to be too high up to make sense for a person to be doing anything. I thought maybe it was a strange reflection off of their binoculars, so I head up there to go and investigate. I call out to them to stop and they're not supposed to hunt here, and suddenly there's movement quickly going away from me. Oh great, they're trying not to be found. Not on my watch, I decide, as I carefully make my way over a short tree that's fallen over a stream and continue after them. I have to stop for a moment to catch my breath, and I can just about make out this person running off before I lose them. I'm in a very heavily snowed part of the forest now, where the snow's very deep and I have to take extra care. As I'm doing so, another flash appears just up ahead of me, roughly where the person ran off into. I'm not so sure whether it's binoculars now because of the nature of the flashes I'm seeing. Again, I think this is pretty odd, but I decide I have to press on and be brave. I shout out, "Hey, you're not supposed to be doing that. I'm a park ranger. Come here now." To which, again, they seem to vanish. I think this is really odd and I'm actually becoming somewhat agitated now. I decide that maybe I should use reverse psychology and just be quiet and try and make my way back, then call it in, and see whether announcing this is enough to scare this person off, or at least make them turn themselves in. It's a perfect plan, I decide, and I start making my way back directly towards the station now, not much further from where the vehicle is. I can see the normal road now, and I'm near more tall trees when, once again, there's a flash. This time much closer though. I suddenly lock eyes with somebody wearing a camouflage suit, holding a camera who's constantly flashing pictures of me. So now I know that this definitely isn't a hunter, and for some reason they just don't look right. There was no military operations out here that I was aware of, and why were they taking pictures of me with an old camera? I then go to speak, but before I can get a word out, I hear a maniac laugh as this person turns around and sprints off into the wilderness. They seem to be moving extremely quick considering the rough terrain. This person seems completely off their head. And for the first time in years of doing this job, other than the time I encountered a mountain lion, I'm actually very scared, and I sprint into the station and radio in what happened. Eventually some of the other rangers joined us, and we conduct a really big search and get the local authorities involved, but we could never find anything. What's weirder is this went on for months and months after, not directly with myself, but with other rangers too, who all reported the same thing. Strange blurry movements off in the distance followed by flashes that seemed to follow them everywhere, and every so often, someone would hear the laugh like I heard. Now, the thought of a maniac being out there in absolutely freezing conditions, in camouflage, taking pictures of us, stalking us for God knows how many days, absolutely terrifies me to the core. And the thing I hate about it, we never found out who that was or what they were doing, or what they were using the pictures for, and that's what I hate about it. To this day, I still don't know why that happened. So my dad and I were walking through the woods when we come across a young moose leg lying on the ground. It looks as though it's been violently torn off with no sign of the rest of the moose anywhere. It was fresh with blood on the ground, and probably no more than a couple of hours old. My dad's a pretty skilled hunter, so he handed me his axe, and he actually looks relatively nervous now at this point in time, telling me watch for wolves, and we start looking for tracks. After a little bit he came back saying, "That's weird. Normally if there's wolves you'd be able to find the paw prints, but I can't find anything. Also no bear prints, so I don't know what killed this." And so I'm like, "What do you mean? Didn't you find anything?" And he very reassuringly responded with, "Well, I did find what appears to be Mama Moose tracks heading this way," showing me the tracks. "Can you see how long the stride is here? It's a lot longer here. Whatever got a baby, she didn't want to fight and just took off running." He then pulls out the bear spray and holds it ready as we keep walking deeper into the woods. We eventually make it out safe, but I still don't know what it was to this day. Now, I'm not a ranger, but back in the early 90s, my brother and I were staying with cousin and her husband, who I'll call Scott, who was a DNR officer. This was opening day of deer bow season in northern Michigan. While I was at least a mile away from any other road or trail, I stumbled across an area that looked like people had been camping there recently. They'd even built this weird outdoor kitchen. Being a naive 16 or 17-year-old, the kitchen confused me because I figured they'd left because of hunting season, so I started making my way there. That night, I was telling everybody about it when Scott gets nervous and told me it doesn't look right, and then says to me, "Can you describe it?" and looks really worried. He told me do not go back there, and I'm glad. Apparently some locals had multiple locations that they would go to cook meth, so they wouldn't blow up their house and it made it harder to get caught. I guess Scott reported it to the police because they raided it a few days later. I must have missed it, but the guys had set up multiple trail cams, which are actually really expensive, especially back then, all around the area. Based on the pics of them, I must have missed the guys by a few hours. They were heavily armed, and all I had was a knife. On the surface, it seems like a well thought out plan for some smart people, but they weren't very smart. Scott filled us up on some details afterwards. Apparently they didn't clear the images off the cameras before leaving. Though very low, they could recognize their faces, and it showed them not only cooking meth, but also carrying illegal guns and riding off on custom four-wheelers that are known to everyone in the area. Now, I'm not a ranger, but here's a pretty weird wood story. It's late spring. Heavy rain had flooded the dike and public hunting grounds, so I decided that I'm gonna go fishing in the shallows with my buddy. We have a good time, didn't really catch anything, and it's getting pretty dark, so we light a fire to go dry off before heading back. As the sunlight is swallowed up, we hear something I can only describe as a blood-curdling scream coming from the distance. A little girl almost. Frogs and what we thought keep talking. Twig snapping now, then again, but much closer. Then we hear it. Could have been as close as 30 feet or even more in the tree line. We hightail it out of there and laugh it off once we get home. Fast forward 6 years, I'm on break and I'm telling the story to my lead, and he pulls up a video and lets me listen. It's the exact same scream. He gives me the phone and I see a mountain lion, realizing they make that sound as a final warning. I was doing some urban exploration in a dilapidated church at night. On one of the floors was a circular motif in the floor where I guess a podium or something was. There was fresh blood on it as though something was killed there. We went into the basement later on and we heard someone running upstairs. I managed to escape from it, but it was still the most scary thing that ever happened. So I went on a mountain hike in Transylvania with a group of friends from school, and way up, after maybe 12 to 14 kilometers of trekking, we saw a house. It was in the middle of nowhere. It had a barn with a few animals like a couple of cows, chickens, etc. As we get closer we see a few people, a guy and 5 to 6 women. Not sure if there are any more inside or not. The dude comes to greet us, barely speaking language. We had a hard time understanding what he was saying. They lived without electricity, gas or anything, and this is in the early 90s, so there's no internet, mobile phones to worry about. At least for most people. Anyway, they all kind of looked at us weird, with kinda dumb expressions on their faces. We can barely understand each other. They said to us, "Who's the president now, and do we want some milk?" They look at our clothes weirdly, curious, like, who knows when's the last time that they actually had human contact? Or maybe we were just crazy for being different, I don't know. Not sure to this day what was going on. It's not typical in religion, so it kind of freaked us out, especially because the guy looked really disturbed, and we were too young. We were looking around to see if there's more of them. Paranoia was taken over, thinking there must have been a village nearby. What was also weird is that all the women keep their distance and never got close to us like he was guarding them or checking us out to see if it's safe for them. One of my friends kept saying that we don't want their milk and we need to go because it's getting dark out. We calmly ended up making our way back and out of their sight. We then get out of there as quick as possible to try and make it back to safety. Needless to say, we camped for a couple of hours and we always had one person staying on watch the whole time. We told people that were living in the villages near there about the mountain people and they didn't believe us. They don't think anything happened. A little over 18 years ago, I'd just gotten out of the military. I drove all the way from Louisiana to my hometown in Montana without incident. I spent a few days at home and then got back on the road because my new home destination was Bias, Idaho. It was February, so instead of going straight down the length of the state, I cut across the panhandle into Washington. The highway going straight down through the state is really twisted and very dangerous in water. So I crossed the state line into Washington. It was a Sunday and it was very, very early in the morning. As cliche as it sounds, there was quite a bit of fog in the air. I'd been driving for a while and really had to use the bathroom. Now, normally, given how I'm in the middle of nowhere, I would just pull over to the side of the road and take a whiz, but it was so foggy and hard to see, I thought it was safer to wait until I hit the next small town. So I drove for maybe 5 more miles and started seeing signs for a town. I can't remember for the life of me the name of the town, but I think it was Linden or Linda or something like that. It was on the I-90 going to Spunky Valley, so I head towards the sign, which was a right turn off the interstate, and it's a short drive up this road and I reached the town. It was small, but I thought nothing of it since I was from a small town in Montana. Now, this is where things get odd. There was not a single person to be found. There were cars and businesses, but not a single person to be found walking around the streets, no logging trucks or anyone driving really. Everything was just as still as the air. I stopped at a gas station. It was one of those one in all places that did car repairs, spare tires, etc., but nobody is at the counter. I thought, well, maybe this was just really, really odd. But maybe it's early in the morning, so I went around to the side to see if the bathroom was locked, and it was. As I made my way back around the front of the store, I can see that finally there's some life. There's a delivery truck. It was a Coke Classic truck. Now it's not actually moving though. It's got its hazards on, and the passenger and driver side doors are open, just sitting in the middle of the street. So yeah, I get a bad vibe, so I go back in my car and went back the way I come through. And I go back to the I-90 and thought again about just peeing at the side of the road, but honestly, I was too afraid. I continue driving until I eventually get to the next area, and honestly, I'm more freaked out and actually forget I need to use the toilet. I didn't see anything creepy or hear anything creepy, but the stillness of the air and the complete lack of human or animal life, which is absolutely terrifying. I looked on the map to see where I was once I got there, which was a Randy McNally's map, and I could not find it at all on the map. Even as I'm writing this, I looked on Google Maps and I can't actually find where I was. I still to this day will never forget that weird feeling of total displacement. When I got to Bose, I told my friend about it and he thought I was trying to rip off Silent Hill or something, or Resident Evil, but honestly, I can't blame people for saying that. But at the same time, there was a reason that I wouldn't urinate at the side of the road. I kept recalling the part in RE1 where hikers were killed by murderous dogs. Anyway, I don't really know what to think of this. I hope no one else has to discover this creepy place. Now I'm somebody who loved to do urban exploring, and I actually had a few stories that I think you guys might find interesting. Now, there was a specific area that I loved to go to. There was lots of abandoned buildings and things around this, and it was covered in trees, so it was really a beautiful forest. Now I remember on one particular occasion that I headed out, I thought maybe it's not such a good idea to go out here on my own, and I grabbed my buddy as we go on one of our night adventures. Now to get to this particular area, we have to go through a normal park. So me and my friend decide that we're going to wait it out under a tree, watch when all the security lock up everything, not make a sound, then leave. Well, that's exactly what we do. We watch the security come through, and they seem to look directly at us, but they don't stop for anything. We feel a lot more relieved when they've actually managed to leave. Now my adrenaline was running very high, because, I don't know, there's some kind of excitement when you're doing this, and we decide to wait a few minutes before getting up. My friend actually has some small binoculars, so we actually get a really good view of what's happening, and luckily we can see that the park is empty now, so we get up and head out. Now you could actually see pretty well just because the area that we're in. Now I know at the time it was probably really stupid, but we were young and didn't think of this. There was actually a house attached to this area, so the resident was probably scared for their life. But anyway, we were planning to explore the abandoned quarry which was very close to the park. We make it over the last security fence and we're having a really good time now exploring. There's not really too much to see, just old abandoned equipment everywhere. We ended up going on top of some kind of excavation machine which was really big. Luckily we're both lightweight so it doesn't make too much sound. We make it on top of it and we just sit here for an hour talking about life, and I guess anything really. As we're talking, we both stop dead as we hear a dog bark in the distance. Now this could be anything because there's other residents that have dogs, but this sounded different. I don't know how to describe it. It sounded very vicious. Oh god man, it's a security dog, I thought to myself. I didn't say anything to my friend, and eventually our confidence comes back and we continue our little explore. Now, everything seems normal, and we ended up just throwing rocks into the water stream running past. I mean really, we'd done everything we wanted to and we just got kind of bored. Just as we did that, we heard somebody shout out, screaming in the distance. We had no idea what was happening, but we both shot down really quick, hiding on the embankment next to the water. I was quite worried about falling in the water, but god, these screams sounded horrible. It sounded like somebody was being murdered. And this went on for a good 2 minutes until suddenly there was absolute silence. We then looked up, and my friend using the binoculars could see there was a group of at least 12 people, all wearing all black with their faces covered, and they were next to a car but we couldn't see what they were doing. I whispered to my friend how many are there, and the dog starts barking. It seems to be pointing in our direction because all of the men simultaneously look up to where we are. We suddenly hear cars starting up, and that was our cue to get out of there. They start screaming out to us. Immediately I knew something was off. This wasn't normal security, this was something far worse. At first we're debating on jumping over the stream, but we realise we're not going to be able to make it, so at this point we're basically trapped in. Now we have two options. We can either run to the left of them or run to the right all the way round to try and escape them. We decide neither's really a good idea, but we have to go to the right side of them. We can suddenly hear that they've started after us and we both sprint. We eventually manage to make it back into the normal park and believe we're somewhat safe, but we now have to sprint for probably 300 meters to get to the other side. We eventually made it out and both made it home but didn't tell anyone about what happened. A few weeks later, the police ended up busting the place and they found out there was a massive drugs operation here. The police never found any bodies or anything like that, but I'm sure they were torturing someone that time. Now that was my first story. Now my other story actually is a far more weird one, but for different reasons. Now like I said, I was somebody who loved to go urban exploring and being in the great outdoors effectively. Now I set off in one particular area that had reports for years of an abandoned church being there that nobody had been to for at least 5 years, and me and a couple of friends wanted to go see what was up. Now to add to the creepy vibes of October, there was mist everywhere and you couldn't really see too far down the road, or whatever area you're in, but imagine being in a forest with thick trees. It was almost like darkness when you were under them, but this is what we loved, so we set out. For a while we were messing around with our flashlights saying we're probably never going to find this thing, and started pretending it was Star Wars or something, but we suddenly become more focused when one of my friends seems to recognise the area and says we're definitely going in the right direction. Unfortunately for us, this means going into a section of the forest which has very, very heavy trees, so basically all we're seeing is darkness now. The trees are superimposing their authority onto us at this point, letting us know that we're not really supposed to be here and something is off, but of course, we ignore every single warning sign that there is and we continue on. Now we're going down an old loggers path at the time and it seems pretty safe. I say old loggers path, but I'm not really sure what it is. Every so often on the walk, you can see some white patches, which is where snow has fallen not too long ago. That's how cold it was. We pick up a few snowballs and start throwing them around randomly. Some of us can actually hit trees and it actually helps us see a bit further up. We eventually come around another section of the woods and find nothing. We're all making fun of my friend, saying, "You've got no idea what you're talking about, there's literally nothing here." To which he laughs and says, "Yeah, but I think we need to go deeper now." We all look at each other a little hesitantly because around us there's nothing but tall dark trees, and you can just about see daylight breaking through the fog above us. But that doesn't deter us, because again, we're stupid at this time. So we continue on into the wilderness. Now we must have walked for about another good hour before we make it through to a clearing again. You can actually see a lot better now because of the snow. And what do you know? Just round the bend, looking like something straight out of a horror film, you can see an abandoned church, or at least the very top of it. We're all absolutely ecstatic at this and we start running towards it when my friend stops and screams, saying he's sure that he's just seen a figure up there. I was actually annoyed because the short scream he let out really scared me. A couple of birds that were hiding in the nearby trees flew off really quickly. They were just as scared as we are. We tell our friend that you have to be quiet, but he's telling us no, I definitely saw something there, and he refuses to go in. Now we decide that we're gonna go on and investigate, and my god, this thing is massive. It's mostly a wooden construction, but it's kind of beautiful really. We can't go in through the door because it's collapsed, but luckily my friend finds another way in through a broken window. This thing has 2 floors, and it's really beautiful. Now what was really odd was the smell. There was kind of a strange metallic smell that none of us could really describe or explain as being metal, but it was very similar. We can't really see too much out of the ordinary, but this thing is really cool. One of my friends sat down pretending that he was praying, and I tell him to knock it off, that we should still be respectful while we're here. He ends up listening to me and quickly jumps up. One of my friends wants to explore the upstairs, but we say that the stairs are too dangerous. There's no way we're going to get up there. What's more is we keep hearing strange sounds from further down, and being the young kids that we are, we have to go and investigate. I decide bravely that I'm going to go down first, and I take one step onto the floor and I slip over. I say, "God, hell, what is this?" As my friend helps me up. The smell was awful. My friend flicks on his flashlight and there seems to be animal blood everywhere. It's absolutely disgusting. But the weirdest thing is there's no animals. We think maybe some animal must have lived here and took its prey, but there was no signs of that at all. Literally just blood everywhere. There's not really writing or pentagrams, but it seems like a person's done this. We all look at each other really confused and decide that it's time to leave, so we make it back upstairs again. I didn't realise how nice this place really was, and there's a large cross in the middle of the place, just in front of where the church seats are. I didn't tell anyone at the time, but I actually prayed to be safe there. I knew something was wrong when the animal blood was everywhere, but I didn't tell anybody else. I just asked God to keep us safe. Now as I get up, I can see another one of my friends going to pretend to pray, kind of making fun of what I was just doing. He puts his hand into the praying position, smiling, and I realise one of my friend's flashlights is on. I turn around to go and see who did it, but I realise that everywhere's glowing a strange red and kind of grey colour. It's almost like somebody flicked on the lights in a different tone. My jaw drops and I turn around to look at my friends, and they're all seeing exactly what I am because they all look at me just as shocked and confused. That's everybody except for the friend who was pretending to pray until he opens his eyes and suddenly realises that something's wrong and starts rubbing his eyes. What's really strange is that seconds after this, a very high wind picked up and it's really howling and we can hear rain outside. We realise something's wrong and that we need to get out of here. We go to make our way outside the door, and there's a very loud punching sound on the other side of it. We all scream and quickly go the opposite direction. We realise now that the only place we can go is into the basement. Good lord, I don't want to do this, I say to my friend. Come on, we've got to, as he pushes me forward. I'd honestly rather be anywhere but down in that smelly basement, but it seems to be the only place we can go. We wait here and we can hear the sounds outside intensifying. At this point, I honestly thought I was gonna die. I don't know what I had done wrong in life, but I wasn't ready to die now, and I don't think my friends were either. We stayed down here for a good 5 minutes until the noises outside started to slowly cease. Weirdly, the bang inside outside kept on going until eventually it come to nothing. I wasn't sure whether it was some weirdo playing tricks on us, or I don't know what I thought it was. But we suddenly realised that my other friend is outside, the one who was too scared to go in. We realised that we must get out of here, and we quickly go upstairs hesitantly. Now everything seems to be as it was. It's foggy outside and a little bit light, but it's not that strange colour, and the wind has stopped completely. Now I didn't really want to go outside first, just in case someone was waiting for us with a big axe to kill us, but one of my friends quickly jumped out, saying, "I'm ready to fight you." To of which the other friend replied, "What are you talking about?" We all come sprinting after him and he says, "Come on, what are you guys doing? I've been waiting here for ages. And why did you go on that rooftop? I told you this is so dangerous." Before we could say our side of the story on what happened, we all looked at each other, and I said to my buddy, "John, you know there was no stairs on that place, right?" To which he turns completely pale. My friend quickly fills him in on what happened, and we all agree that we have to get out of there. We probably jogged for about 3 minutes, but this was hindered by our levels of fitness, and we basically hiked the rest of the way into the normal part of the forest. We were so scared that we didn't look back the way that we come from. While we were moving, I was half expecting to see something chasing us, or people. I was so scared that every time I was seeing strange patches of snow, I would think I'd see pentagrams and things on the floor, just where I was at such a heightened sense of panic. We continue down and the air feels very cold now. None of us actually stop to talk to each other while we're getting out of there. We just all look around very paranoid, making sure that it's safe now. We continue on until eventually we make it to the normal area that we know, and we're not far back to safety. We all jump into my friend's truck and get out of there. We weren't driving at a sensible speed too, I can tell you that, but who could blame us? Now the thing that's really strange is that all of us saw the exact same thing inside the church, heard the same wind outside and the same banging, but all my friend waiting outside saw was a person on the roof after a while, who moved into sight quickly, seemed to stare at him, then gone back to the other side of the roof. Now I know for a fact nobody could have gotten up there, because there weren't any stairs, and there's no way you could climb up it, so who the hell was it? What were they doing up there? And why did we experience different things? I'd like to think this was some kind of elaborate hoax, or maybe it was something to do with Satan worshippers, but I really don't know. Now to set the scene for my story, at the time I was just a broke college kid. I was driving back from the campus back towards where my parents live. Now, I'd been on the road for quite a number of days now, stopping at different motels periodically not to get too tired and fatigued. When I reach my parents' state, it suddenly becomes a lot more wooded, and I guess the air becomes cleaner in some ways. I'm not really too much of a hippie about environmental things, but honestly I think there's a huge difference you find when you get back into the cleaner air states, i.e. the ones with more woods and forests. Now, to set the scene a little bit further, at the time of this trip I was pretty tired to be honest and kind of getting fed up of everything. Honestly, it feels like no matter how much I work, I didn't seem to be getting anywhere. The assignments were basically piling up and I was getting really fed up of it. I mean, I guess a lot of you can relate to this, but at the time I didn't really realise that it was important to manage time, so I'd basically implode every once in a while, hence why I was pretty happy to be driving. Now, to be honest, I really found that I was resetting while driving through those woods. Now, on this particular day in question, I was feeling pretty tired. I've been on the road for a little bit now and I only had myself for company. So to try and make things a little more interesting, I decided that I was going to drive through the woods. Now, I mean off the road kind of, well at least a true pavement, onto the kind of gravelly roads until it's basically a forest road. If you live in those kinds of areas, you'll know the difference. New to these areas I was not, but this one I was. I pulled onto this main road when it wasn't too dark. The sun was beginning to set and I was basically on the very last stretch. As I turn into this part of the road, I immediately almost run over a rabbit and stop because of it. I feel a bump in the road and I'm convinced that I've just killed the poor thing. I say, oh god, you've got to be kidding me. I really wanted a break from having things on my conscience and already feeling burnt out. It felt like everything was starting to accumulate. I got out and luckily it all seemed to be fine. That was when I noticed someone off the side of the road. I said, hey, I almost killed that thing and laughed, hoping they would respond, but they don't seem to say anything. They just stand there, just off to the side of a tree, and don't say a word to me. I realise that I'm not very welcome here and decide that I probably need to get a move on. The person isn't dressed too strange. They have a flannel jacket on, I think that's what they're called, which is kind of a dark yellowy colour, some jeans on and a cap, and I really can't see much else. They seem pretty tall, at least 6 feet, and I don't want to stick around for much longer. Glad that I've not killed the rabbit, I'm happy to set off again, though I have to be a little bit more slow now, as I decide that I'm going to avoid the main road and go off the roads that are kind of more winding and easier to get lost to. I know it's stupid because I thought I was escaping the danger of that person, but instead I was probably getting myself somewhat lost. I take a quick look in the mirror and I can't see them anywhere, so I think I'm fine. While I'm driving, night has started to set quickly and I turn on the radio for some music. It's just some of the local stations which aren't really good to say the least, so I ended up putting in a cassette tape that I have. And yes, I'm an old person, so we used to use cassette tapes. At the time I was listening to Nirvana and it was pretty cool. I love Smells Like Teen Spirit and some of their other classics they had on there. Now the first part of my return goes pretty well. Everything's relatively normal and I do make way. I'm pretty sure I'm heading in the right direction, but I realised soon that maybe it wasn't a good idea to go off the main path. Where I'm driving, I pretty much come to a snail's pace because of all the trees around me, and I have to be very careful not to go over something that could puncture my tyre. Now the radio cuts in and out basically because I'm going relatively deep into the forest now, so I really have to mind my way because I know I'm kind of getting lost at the same time due to the unresponding radio signal. However, lo and behold, I can see some red lights just up ahead of me, signaling that there's probably another car up there and that I should probably follow them to get back to civilization. I know this is a stupid idea, but when you're lost it seems like a good one. I turn on my lights momentarily and try and capture what kind of car it is, but it's pretty hard to tell, but it's basically a black truck. I try and get a closer look, but I realise that I can't actually see their lights that well. That's bizarre. It seems like they're driving in the dark and I've only seen the reflection temporarily, or maybe they turned their lights off when they saw me, or they were braking. I wasn't too sure, and then I noticed something else odd. I can't seem to see any kind of registration plate on the truck ahead of me. Now this is probably a bad sign to be honest, because why would anybody be driving around here without a reg plate? Well, I guess there's probably a good chance that they're up to something dodgy or are not insured, so I decide the best thing I can do now is just keep quite a nice pace behind them. I continue driving regardless and make sure that I keep a distance. It's now blatantly obvious that I'm behind them because of course I'm coming at them with my beams on, so at least I can accept that they know where I am. I continue following for a number of seconds until I seemingly come up right behind them and I realise that they've stopped for some reason. Now this is pretty odd, and you don't really want to have this in the forest. The problem really is that somebody might be coming up behind me now, and I'm not going to be able to escape. I keep looking in my rearview mirror because I'm pretty paranoid that something dodgy is about to happen, but I can't figure out exactly what it could be. I roll down my window for a second about to ask if they need help, but I realise quickly this is a stupid idea, and luckily some higher conscious in my brain kicked in and said, "Get back, don't do this." So I start to reverse my car a little bit. After a few seconds they turn on their lights and I can actually see the rear views a bit, and they start driving. I give them a few seconds to go off and I seem to not be able to catch up with them again. I'm still not exactly sure where I am at this point and it's quite annoying. It's starting to become a little bit foggy at the same time, which is really restricting my visibility. It seems strange because the truck basically went into nowhere and I really can't figure out where they could have possibly gone. Also, the road was pretty cruddy up here. There's these massive holes in the road and I'm really worried that I'm going to bust my tyre or my car. And I know my mum would have killed me if I had done that, and I hate to think what would have happened if my dad caught me in that situation. So I plough onwards just very cautiously. The trees are relatively big at this point, and they're pretty full of life. If I roll down the window just a little bit to get some air, I have to be careful for bugs not to fly in. I think at this time of year especially, they're really in full swing of life, and it's pretty nice on most occasions, just not this one. I continue going down the same path until eventually I make it back onto a main forest road, if that makes sense. I'm very relieved at this point because I'm no longer lost necessarily and I have a rough idea of what direction I have to go in. Basically, this will be pretty much a one-way thing until I get to the main road again, and then I'm only about 50 minutes from home. Success is in sight. I continue driving and realise that my gas isn't too good at the moment, so I have to make sure I get back and don't get stranded out here. Now when I see it this time, it's like it's had a little crash, but almost comical how obviously it's been set up. It literally looks like a truck is crashing into a tree and someone's laying next to it, but there's no damage whatsoever to the truck. While driving a little further, I can catch the reflection of something up ahead. Now I realise that it's the same truck again. This time I can just see the glow of its tail lights. I decide to stop and scope it out. I have some cheap binoculars with me and I try my best to see, but unfortunately, with astigmatism, it just looks like a big blur because of the headlights. God, how are my eyes this bad that I can't even look for danger? I decide to put the binoculars down, actually throwing them back towards me in frustration, and decide that I should very cautiously creep up and investigate what's wrong. Now it appears like the same truck from before has just gone off to the side of the road, and it's perfectly parked in front of a tree. The tree's completely fine, but there seems to be something next to it. I pray to God it's not a body, but something just feels off in this situation. I start to edge closer and closer until I realise that somebody seems to be laying on the ground. They're dressed in basically all black with a strange kind of robe on. It's almost like a cape but not really, but they just look really out of place in terms of what they're wearing. I then realise that the truck is literally perfectly fine and the tree, and the person, funnily enough, has moved very slightly. I realise that I'm probably in grave danger now and this is a setup. I feel frozen with fear and don't know whether I can go on or not. I decide the best thing to do now is just reverse the truck, then turn around. I'm keeping my eyes fixated on this person 100% in the road, making sure they don't move, and making sure that there's nobody waiting in the truck for me. The last thing I want to do is get shot by a shotgun, and I'm too young to pass away like this. I slowly back out and look 100% forward the whole time until eventually I round a corner. Now luckily for me, nothing happens at this point. I'm able to turn around and make it onto some more forest roads where I can take the long way round. Now granted, going through the back roads is really a bad idea because this path alone is bad enough, but coming off the road makes it even worse for me. But something is off about this. I know now that I have to get away from this person because something is wrong. I decide to stop for one moment, pick up the binoculars and scout out before I proceed. I quickly turn off all the lights and look at my binoculars. I realise now that if I slowly come out of my car and kind of crawl up to the trees, I can investigate with the binoculars. Feeling truly like G.I. Joe, hell of a name, I decide that I'm gonna do it. I slowly crawl out, making as little noise as possible, still with the engine off and all of the lights. I don't bother locking the door, and I slowly crawl up to the position where I need to scout out what's happening. I can no longer see the figure, but the truck seems to have moved a little bit further. God, I knew they were up to something. Luckily for me, I didn't panic too much. Don't ask me why, I was probably just fed up and wanted to get home. I continue watching and basically nothing happens for a good 2 minutes, me purely fixated on the truck, slowly being caught up with the sounds of the insects and whatnot around me. Suddenly, I hear rustling to the left of me. I stop dead in my tracks, not moving another inch from my vantage point. I decide to stay perfectly still, and I can hear this person slowly getting closer and closer to me through the forest. I can hear crunch, crunch, crunch slowly getting louder. I try my best not to look to my left, but I have to. I need to know whether I have to fight or run now. And suddenly, I notice it's a creature on the floor. I don't know exactly what this is, but maybe it's some kind of possum I haven't seen before. It's hard to tell because of all the adrenaline running through my body made my eyes shake a little bit and not focus. I go, God, under my breath, and then immediately back to the truck. Now I realise that the truck is gone, which is really bizarre because I was watching that thing only 10 seconds ago and I didn't hear it move, but maybe just maybe I was so scared that I couldn't really look anywhere else. Now realising that the potential danger seems to be heading off in the opposite direction as me, I decide to wait for a while, but I want to scout out the area before I go any further. I didn't remember to lock the truck at the time, and I considered going back to do it, but realised that I'm going to hear anyone pretty quickly if they go there. I decide to continue on my G.I. Joe mission and crawl up closer and closer to where the truck was. I then begin crawling very slowly and quietly through the leaves, and I realise that I'm not making much sound and I feel pretty safe at the time. My eyes have basically adjusted to the darkness pretty well, and I'm just being more careful not to go into little puddles and things. I don't want to get my clothes crappy, especially not out here. I continue on, and I eventually make it up to the edge of the trees, basically where the road is. Now from here I can see pretty well in both directions, and I can see that the coast is clear. I still have literally no sign of the person or the truck, so I assume that they've gone off in another direction trying to look for me. If they stayed on the main path, which I'm pretty certain they have, then they're not going to be near me. They've probably gone in the opposite direction because I wouldn't have been able to escape otherwise. I decide the best thing to do now is slowly crawl back to my original position. I can hear movement once again, just the second I start turning, and I duck down. I bury myself in leaves and wait. I can hear a click 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 around me with twigs breaking. I can hear this continuing for a few seconds, but it sounds just like the animal I heard before, so I'm suddenly at ease again. Now I'm not 100% convinced that this is what happened, but I'm far quieter now just in case, and decide to lay buried as long as I can. I think I'm pretty well buried and I'm just getting annoyed at the smell of the leaves around me. They smell absolutely disgusting. I wait here for a good 10 minutes until I start to get quite cold quite quickly and realise that once again I should really be getting on the move. And I take the leaves off myself, now realising that I wasn't as well hidden as I thought I was. Now one strange thing during this is I can see a red light in the trees, maybe 4 or 5 feet in the air. I don't know what it was, and I only saw it for about 5 seconds, but it definitely distracted me. I then realised that I have to crawl back and I should probably stay as quiet as I can to do so. I turn round and I start making my way towards the truck again. Now everything's normal at first and I don't really have anything concerning. Every so often I can hear the sounds of animals around me, but I kind of come at one with nature at this point, and I'm not really bothered by them now, and I'm pretty sure I can differentiate the difference between those and people. Whoever was trying to get me is now long gone, and I slowly make it back to my truck. Now I'm glad that I didn't bother locking it before because it would have made far too much sound, and I jump back in. I put the ignition in and I do something relatively stupid. I don't turn on any lights whatsoever. I'm worried it's going to draw attention to me, and my night eyes are pretty well adjusted now. I turn off some of the lights inside the cabin that I can control, and I very slowly start reversing back out the way I've come. Now to say this was difficult would be an understatement, especially because some condensation is built up on the rear mirror and the rear window, but I make it somehow. Now I was doing some incredible reverse driving here that I really wish some other people could have seen. I eventually make it back onto the path and I take a look to my left and right and can't see anything or anyone. Presuming it's safe now, I start off. Now maybe adrenaline or senses are caught up with me after my adrenaline dump because I end up going very quick. While driving I notice a small little cabin building just off to the right of the road, but it looks like it's been long abandoned. I'm driving very quick and some rain has picked up at this point. I decide that I have to put on the lights because it's too dangerous now and I really can't see where I'm going. I went over a bump slightly too quick in the road and I skid, I'm not kidding, seconds from hitting a tree. I managed to kind of oversteer around the tree and I cursed myself for being so stupid. It then dawns on me that if I drive at this pace I'm probably going to catch up with whoever's ahead of me. I then realise the best thing I can do is turn my normal beams on and flash my full beams periodically just so I can illuminate corners. But of course the issue with doing so is that it's going to notify everyone around me as to exactly what I'm doing right now. I continue driving at a more normal pace and I realise that I have to do this or I'm going to run out of fuel pretty soon. While driving, I'm suddenly met with a flash of light. It kind of dazes me for a millisecond and I'm partially blinded. Suddenly I can see well again and I realise that it was a lightning bolt. A few seconds later I almost jolt forward and fall out of the driving seat because the loudest thunder I've ever heard in my life seems to have gone off at that exact moment I was driving. Most likely heightened from this situation, I feel really scared again. What's worse is the trees are getting much bigger where I am now and it's making driving very difficult. I decide to turn on my high beams for most of this part of the journey, though I know it's not good for my car battery, and at the time my car was pretty old, so this is an issue. Around another corner and the rain's picked up a lot and I go through quite a big puddle, and I kid you not, the car stopped. I pull my head back and say, God, you've got to be kidding me. This literally looks like that scene in Jurassic Park when the car breaks down and the dinosaur comes. I didn't have one of those cool Jeep things and I don't have a sunroof to look out of, but God I was scared. I ended up punching the steering wheel and luckily it didn't set off the car horn because that would have easily notified others of my position. I quickly turned my head around, scouting all around me looking for anyone else that could either help me or might be a danger, and I don't see anyone. I jump out of the car and quickly start pushing it. I managed to just about get it off of a rock that it was stuck under. I mean, that's probably an exaggeration, but I just kind of shimmied it into a better position. I start kicking some more rocks and things around so I can clear up a path, and my tire is now free again. I quickly jump back in and my feet are soaked, and luckily the car starts now. Luckily for me, no dinosaurs come to eat me. I then turn off of another forest road, and I know exactly where I am now. I'm not far from a main road, and God, I'm excited. Just before I turn on, I stop to give way to potential oncoming traffic, and my hands tighten on the steering wheel. At first I'm not sure exactly why I'd done this, then a second later I realised that my subconscious has noticed car beams coming. I quickly turn off the engine and all of the lights with it, and I duck down in my seat. Another car's coming. Then it hits me, it looks just like the truck I've seen before. I lay as low as I can as it slowly passes me, quickly jumping up when it's about to round the corner. Then I realise that it has a license plate. It's a different car. I let out a sigh of relief as I realised that I'm probably a little too paranoid from what happened. I start my engine again and then turn onto the road. Now for the first couple of minutes of driving, I'm going at a ridiculous speed again, kind of neglecting my fuel. I realise soon that this is a pretty bad idea because I'm not actually sure where the next gas station is. I drive for another 10 minutes until eventually I make it back to roughly where civilization should start, and I know a gas station isn't too far away. Now on this drive, I basically put down those people to playing a cruel prank on me, or maybe they thought it was a friend of theirs or God knows what, and I've actually calmed myself down a lot. I decide that I'm not going to report it to anyone, I'm just going to go asleep, and I know for a fact that if I tell my parents, they're never going to forgive me for driving this course alone, and they're going to demand that they go and pick me up from my college, and that's not going to happen. I don't need the embarrassment from them, thank you. So, I continue on. I eventually pull into a gas station, and my God, I've never seen such a middle of nowhere one as this. To say it looked creepy would be an understatement, and I'm very tempted to go back into the forest again because I'd rather deal with whatever was out there than this place, but I don't have much of a choice. My meter is just over empty, and I'm on an incline, so that's probably accounting for it having that little bit above it. I sigh and say, fine, if I've got to go in, I've got to go in, and I close the door and step out into another puddle. God, this can't get any worse, I say to myself. I decide with the $10 I had remaining in my wallet that I'm going to spend $7 on gas and I'm going to use the other 3 on getting some kind of food or whatever as a treat. As I get closer, I realise that this isn't really going to be an easy gig because there's not much food in there, which does actually annoy me because I'm quite hungry, and they only have them small portable gasoline things that you can fill up when it's an emergency. I walk in there and I realise that they have some chocolate bars and I'm quite delighted. I say, hey, how much for the gas and how much for the chocolate? Clearly with a $10 in my hand. And the attendant says, well, $2 for the chocolate or $10 for the gas. And I regret to say that I had to get the gas at this point, and I hand over the money. Now the person working in there, the only person in there I should say other than me, seems really weird. He seems to hold eye contact for far too long after you've said something, and I just get a really weird uneasy feeling off this guy. He has a weird moustache, he's dressed in a one-piece overall like he's just come out of a farm, and it looks like he doesn't know what the 21st century is. He's about 6 feet tall, and I start to realise that he's kind of matching the description of the person I saw earlier. The clothes were a little different, yeah, but He just gives me really weird vibes that I've not really experienced before. He holds his eye contact for far too long every time and it really annoys me. I go to leave, then he says, "Where are you from? Out of town?" I think, oh god, this is the end for me, and I start panicking and start looking towards the exits quickly. I do so very blatantly because he says, relax, we're not all gonna kill you out here, which made me feel 10 times worse. I then say, no, I'm from very close to here, I'm just on the way home from college. He says, college? What'd you need that for? I don't actually bother explaining the course I'm taking because I'm sure he's not going to understand it or why I'm doing it. Though he keeps on pestering on and I tell him that I'm doing business. He laughs and says, business? I didn't need a business degree to get in here. Then says how it's a waste of money and starts blaming the government and other things along those lines. He then says, no really, what are you doing out here? I then feel very uneasy and I take a few steps back and he says again, I'm not gonna kill you. But what were you and your friend doing out here? I'm very worried now that this guy is absolutely off his head and he's just imagining that someone else is there and maybe he sees people. I say, no one's with me. He says, why didn't he come in the store with you? I say, what do you mean? He says, who is that just got out of your car? I say, no one, somewhat angrily. He says, I literally saw someone get out of your car, stand in the middle of the car park, just stare at you for a good 4 minutes, then walk off into the forest. The penny dropped. I turn around, then turn to the store attendant, then once more. I try to speak, but no words can come out. I just quickly tell him to lock the door. Thankfully he follows this and says, what's wrong? What is wrong? And sits me down, but I'm too scared to move. I then barely get the words out and explain, I think someone's followed me. I'd come here on my own. Then it hits me of what happened moments earlier. The truck I saw earlier. I start crying a little bit with the fear and he manages to calm me down and says, don't worry, I'm gonna go and look. You're safe here. He quickly goes to grab something from the back, unlocks the door, then runs out. He's gone out there with a shotgun, I realise, and I tell myself, this can't be happening. Terrified, I quickly go and lock the door because I'm worried that I'm gonna get followed once again. I don't know whether this person is playing some kind of big game on me, and this is all just fun for him, and he's the one in the truck. I can't be sure, but he's gone outside with the gun into the darkness as the rain falls down. I can hear the occasional lightnings, and that really makes it feel like it's a horror movie right now. I put my hand in my head and close my eyes, and I hear bang 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 on the door. I look up and thank God it was the store attendant again. He says, hey, what are you doing? Let me in. And I apologise and quickly open the door. He said, hey, whoever that is long gone now, but I want you to see this. He takes me outside with him, still with the shotgun, which is probably the only reason that I went outside with him. You can see some muddy footprints that lead from the opposite side of my car, away from the driver's side, that stand exactly like the guy just described to me, then slowly fade off into the forest. This guy was telling the 100% truth. There was someone in my car that I have no idea about that was in there for God knows how long with me. The attendant then says, quick, we're coming inside and calling the police, and I have to thank him for this. We get back inside and he makes me a coffee quickly for free. He then hands me the phone and he says, I've dialed it for you. An officer picks up and I report exactly what's happened and they say they're going to send someone out to investigate. I say, do you want me to wait here? And they say, no, it's not necessary. And they then send out their squad and hang up. I then thank the store attendant profusely and I apologise for being so paranoid, but he said it's understandable. He said there's people out here that you don't ever want to mess with, and he said he's heard some stories. He then says that he'll follow me out to my car, but he can't go any further. I thank him profusely again and he says it's nothing and turns around cold-heartedly almost and heads back into the store. I then get in my car again and again I'm ashamed to say it, but I absolutely floor it, going way too quick. The next 30 minutes or so of the drive feel like an absolute blur, and I eventually make it back onto the road that leads to my parents' house, back to true civilization. I pull into my parents' driveway, park up and quickly go to bed. Everyone else is asleep now, it's almost 3 in the morning. I ended up hitting the sheets and waking up the next day feeling exhausted. I didn't tell my parents what happened and my dad jokes and said, "How'd you get caught out in the rain?" I never had the heart to tell them even to this day because I know how much it would have scared them. I tried to follow up and get answers from the police about what happened, but they didn't give me any information and said the investigation's still ongoing. This all happened years ago, and I still have no idea who is in my car with me, or for how long, or what they planned on doing to me. When I was a kid, my family and I were hiking in the mountains. We got to a small clearing at the end of a dirt road and we saw a red convertible with its doors open. My dad said, "Wait guys, let's check this out." He walked around the car a few seconds and then immediately started speed walking towards us. He didn't even look back at us and just said, "Let's go now." I was curious, so I started to walk over to the car but saw several bullet holes and blood on the seats. I ran back and said, "Dad, what happened?" He said, "I don't know, but the hood was warm." It still gives me chills. One of the more weird experiences of my life was while driving through the woods in pretty much the middle of nowhere. My car seemed to stop completely randomly, and I thought there was hailstones outside. There was prodding on the top of my car, then the sides, even to the point that I could actually see the impact on the window, but there was no hailstones whatsoever. It was literally like hundreds of people were punching the sides of my car, and suddenly it stopped, like nothing ever happened. It was so scary that I didn't inspect the car until I got to my destination, but I could clearly see some dents in the side of it like people had been punching it or throwing rocks, but there was no rocks or anything. So one night, I was walking to my friend's house from my grandpa's. The fastest route was to actually cut through a trailer park surrounded by woods. There was a path if you knew the correct yard to trespass, sneaking through a family's yard. Now I finally come to the edge of the woods, only to see very distinct orbs of lights about the size of softballs hovering in front of me. I froze and stare at them for a while, kind of squinting, cocking my head back to see what the hell they are. I decided to approach them and then they flew away. Now I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I still don't know what I saw to this day. Now this is going to be very long, and everything's based on real life events. So my family owns a lot of property in Heltus, Texas. One ranch actually has a ton of history. Now I grew up on this ranch, and my dad owns a small single-wide trailer. We were neighbours with my tia and tio. They're about 100 yards to the left of us. The back of our trailer is really close to thick woods, so it didn't really have a backyard. We are kind of plopped right in the middle with the woods, but our driveway was connected to the main dirt road, if that makes any sense. Well, I always felt creeped out around the backyard area and our back door. Like I said, we didn't have a backyard. It was a heavy uncleared wooded area. We never used the back door, and it was always locked with one of those chains that went inside. I was actually a very active kid. I couldn't sit still or inside and chill. I always had to be outside exploring. Usually my cousins and I would explore the ranch, build forts and ride four-wheelers, but there were times when we would go exploring but I would go off on my own. I remembered one time I was looking around the trailer alone, trying to find a good spot to build a fort. I was about 8 then. I went right to the end of the trailer to explore. Now this area had a large cleared brush. Behind me was the wooded area. I remembered walking around focusing on finding a good fort spot when out of nowhere I felt very uneasy. My attention immediately went back to the wooded area. I felt as though someone was staring at me. The feeling was so intense, I literally booked it into my house. I remembered that I wasn't really sure exactly who was there, but I just knew someone was near and staring at me. There was another time too, not too long after, that I started experiencing weird things, where I came home from my cousin's house and gone to get some clothes since I was staying the night with her around 9 p.m. My cousin's driveway connects to the main dirt road in the same area as my driveway. Anyway, when I opened the front door and walked into the trailer, I noticed the back door was completely open. Again, I was staying at my cousin's house, right next to the driveway over, and my dad was down the road at a local bar. There was no one at the trailer for hours. My dad never opened the back door ever for any reason. I immediately felt very spooked and tailgated it back to my cousin's house without getting the clothes where I initially went to pick it up. Now there's many other weird things that my cousins and I experienced on the ranch, but this experience is by far the most alarming. It was during the summer of '07, so we're about 12 at the time. We were at my cousin's house, and my dad took us to Hollywood Video earlier that day to rent a movie. This was what he did to make up for being at the bar until around 2 a.m. So we ended up renting the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and decided to watch it until around 1 a.m. We chose to rent this movie and watch it at the time because we love to get spooked. Well, after we had finished the movie, it's around 2 a.m. and we're still up and want to play or party around. So we decided that we would walk to my trailer and pick up the boombox so we could listen to our CDs we'd just burnt on LimeWire and jam out and dance. Remember, my cousin's driveway is connected to the main road parallel to where my driveway was. We went to walk in, and out of nowhere we hear a chainsaw going off in the hill about 50 yards to the left of us, way too close for comfort. Again, this was 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. All the land surrounding us is owned by a close family. No one would ever go there to clear the land or operate a chainsaw, not at 2 a.m. in the dark. We had to use a flashlight to see the dirt road in front of us, that's how dark it is. When we heard the chainsaw, we all paused and looked at each other confused. Once we processed what we're hearing, we ran as fast as we could and make it to the trailer just about over to my cousin's house. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't home. He was out doing whatever he was doing, so we couldn't tell him about what we just heard or ask for a ride back to the cousins. Now none of us even had a cell phone at the time. We ended up grabbing my loaded .22 and walking back with it in hand. Now luckily we never heard that chainsaw again. Now to this day, my cousins and I are perplexed over this experience. There's literally no logical explanation for the chainsaw we heard at like 2 a.m. In a weird way, it almost sounded like a very loud recording of a chainsaw rather than an actual one. Again, none of my family would wake up at 2 a.m. and start clearing land/brush, or play with a very loud chainsaw recording for any reason. I feel especially weirded out because at the time we just finished watching that particular film. Even though we were trying to get spooked, we know it wasn't just in our heads because we all heard it and we weren't expecting to hear it either. We all heard it as clear as day at the exact same time. My cousins and I told our family about the experience multiple times. My family is always weird. My dad got short with us and said, well, shouldn't have been out there at that time. My tia said something like, well, this is why we always tell you to get back inside after the dark. Now, for some extra info, our family has been in Texas since it is a part of Mexico. My cousins and I are part of Daughters of the Republic of Texas, and our history runs deep. We also have native/indigenous lineage. However, I don't know too much about it, But anyway, I was very creeped out by this and hoped to get some answers. So this happened on Thursday, and I want to know what you guys think. Okay, so I totally understand if no one believes me, but we're still unsure of what happened. So let me explain. On Friday, we're making our way to Clark Summit. As we were walking, now one by one we noticed that we're veering off the trail. I said to my friend in front of me why he's going off the trail, and he said to our friend who is in front the same thing. The friend told us, "I can hear a woman talking, can't you guys hear it?" Now we can't hear anything. We tried to convince her to leave it because it's already kind of dark, and we were close to where we wanted to set up camp on the trail. The friend in the front is female, and insisted what she heard sounded like a woman calling for help. And it sounded like it was really close. She said she felt like she is inclined to investigate a possible female in distress. While we're totally okay with going about our business, really. Okay, so I got a bit spooked at first hearing that because she's obviously serious, and we're absolutely certain we can't hear whatever she is. Here's where it gets weird. We only veered off the trail about 300 to 400 meters, yet at one point, we're completely lost. We don't have any fancy gear or GPS stuff because we never really needed it. But we've been on this trail long enough to know that we haven't gone far yet. Yet, we couldn't find any trail or direction after walking for a good 20 minutes. I started to feel weird and really lightheaded. And when I mentioned this to another, they said they felt the same. Now, this was already getting pretty strange. It was like something changed the environment around us, or moved us somehow to another location. I have no idea which way to go, and now it was fully dark. My female friend said she also heard the woman say that "I'm over here and please help," saying it sounded like Curtin crying. So now we're somewhat lost, after only walking for about 20 minutes off a large trail because my friend is hearing voices. We decided to stop walking in any direction, because the last thing that we wanted to do is get lost in the dark. Now we had 2 tents, yes, and sleeping bags in our packs, so we found a clearing and set up. We figured once the sun was out, we would easily find our way back off to the trail. Before we could even lay out the rest, I noticed a tree near us was moving as if someone was climbing it. Now, it was really dark. I wear glasses, so I really struggled to see. So then I called them over to see. I thought it was an animal at first, but it wasn't. It wasn't anything. I could see the outline of what was roughly a human shape, but it was transparent, like completely see-through. That's the best way to describe it. It's similar to the way that heat waves move on the pavement and whatnot. It's the same effect. They see it too. My male buddy said to me, "What are we looking at?" And when we finally spot it, they all said the same thing, transparent but still visible through the foliage. We all just stood there, still whispering theories back and forth as to what we were looking at. I thought maybe it was some kind of optical illusion, but they both immediately jumped to aliens, of course. The thing just sat there, perched on a large branch about 50 feet up. It was like it was watching us. The other oddity is that, after staring at this thing for about 10 minutes, the rest of the forest sounds seemed to go back to normal. Now this was really odd. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I have goosebumps all over me for realizing that it suddenly went silent for no reason. After about 10 minutes of us standing there, whatever this thing was started climbing up the tree, and ever more, until we can't really see it anymore. We approached the base of the tree slowly, walking in a circle with our nets cranked up trying to see it. It was too dark, and the trees were too close up for us to see the top. We didn't hear it jump to another tree, so we assumed it was still up there. We're all obviously spooked, so we're not really sure what to do at this point. Now after 5 minutes of walking, we managed to get back on the trail. Now I literally dropped my bag and said, "What the hell?" And we all stood there very confused, trying to confirm what we were seeing. Now my buddy likes to joke and said maybe we walked through some hallucinogenic spores and had imagined all of it, but I highly doubt that. But whatever happened, it seemed kind of like, I guess, predatory. Like something was luring us, trying to confuse us. My friend still thinks that we were messing with her and not hearing the woman. Was it that thing we saw imitating a woman? Did we get lost on the trail? This is easily the weirdest thing that I've ever seen in my life, and we still don't have a good theory as to what we saw. I mean, this thing wasn't an alien potentially, but it seemed to be humanoid, but it was 100% transparent somehow, able to climb a large tree without making any noise. I truly don't know what we encountered this day. While working as a park ranger, it wasn't uncommon to get calls out to investigate fires, and that happened one day, and boy, I'll never forget it. I headed over to a reported area, and there was already a few other police there and firefighters. They had already checked out the area and knew nobody was in there. I went to go and look at a cabin just before it collapsed, and I kid you not, I saw a dark figure come, stand perfectly in the middle of the flaming doorway, and not move even once it collapsed. They remained completely black amongst the fire, and seemingly just vanished after that. I wasn't sure whether somebody was there and maybe just somehow melted, but we searched through the whole area and there's literally no one.